Chapter 170. Time continued to pass. The expressions of the examinees outside the tower became more and more grave. The shock in their eyes became more and more intense. They didn't know when the outcome of this match would be decided. After Tian Haisheng Shui's departure, Go Han-shi and Jishio were without a doubt the two strongest amongst the examinees present. No matter how they looked at it, this match shouldn't have lasted for so long. This match had lasted for so long, it wasn't the same as Chen Changsheng and Luo Luo's match. The sounds that came from within the tower never stopped. Sometimes it was like thunder, sometimes it was like a massive wave crashing into the air. Gorgeous clouds would occasionally appear in the dark blue sky. This was a scene of the miniature world being disturbed by true essence. These sounds and scenes were proof of how intense the battle within the tower was. It was quiet outside the tower. Everyone stared at the tightly shut door and listened to the sounds that came from within. They were all extremely nervous. They didn't know what was going on within. When the time finally passed by an hour, even the faces of the three disciples of Li Shan, sword sect, started to show signs of worry. After Tang 36 said that to Chen Changsheng, he didn't say anything else. His expression became more and more grave. His gaze became more and more serious. He stood straighter and straighter, as if he wanted to use this to express his respect towards a certain someone. An hour passed, the battle still continued. Xian Yuanpa looked towards Tang 36 and asked, "What do you know? Nothing's going to happen, right?" Tang 36 was silent for a moment before saying, "That wolf cub is fighting with his life on the line." In the previous match, Jishio had taken the banknote and nodded his head in satisfaction, indicating that he would fight well. Thus, he had sent that fellow student from Star Caesar Academy, flying out of the Education Palace. Before this match, he hadn't said anything, but reality had proven that he was fighting with his life on the line. There were many ways to battle. Fighting well was one. Fighting with his life on the line was another. No matter how strong Jishio was, there was still an insurmountable gap between him and Go Han-shi, who had already completed his ethereal opening. If he didn't fight with his life on the line, how could he have lasted for so long? Chen Changsheng hadn't said anything. He understood why Tang 36 had suddenly said those words to him. The will to fight that Jishio had displayed and the price he had paid was obviously not something that could be bought with a mere banknote. The mercenary had started fighting with his life on the line, proving that he really wanted that item. Wolves are the most persevering and enduring animals in the world. Luo Luo listened to the sounds that occasionally resounded within the tower. Her small face revealed an unbearable expression as she said, "In the past, when Jishio first hunted a demon warrior, he was only 11 years old. That time he chased that demon warrior on the snowy plains during winter for 3 months. Only when the demon warrior was exhausted and weak did he successfully kill it." Chen Changsheng thought to himself that the patience and endurance of the wolf tribe was indeed extremely strong. What he did not realize was that this was only the most glamorous part of the story. After a moment of silence, Luo Luo continued, "But no one knew that at that time the hidden illness in his body suddenly broke out. Coupled with the fact that he hadn't eaten for more than 10 days and only drank some snow water, it could truly be said that he was only one step away from death. If that demon warrior hadn't collapsed and given up, perhaps he would have been the first to die." The forest was quiet. Tang 36 looked at the tightly shut door of the tower and said with a complex expression, "The wolf cub's dictionary doesn't contain the words give up and benevolence. If it wasn't for the limited space within the tower and the restrictions placed on battles, if he and Go Han-shi were to have a battle of life and death in the real world, I really don't know who would have been able to last until the end." Chen Changsheng looked towards the tower, remaining silent. Above the round tower, the layers of clouds in the dark blue sky were torn to shreds. Mournful cries could be heard from time to time. It was unknown whether it was the howling of the wind or the howling of a wolf, each sound startling. His gaze fell upon the door, but it was as if he could see within the tower. He could see the expressionless Jishio and Go Han-shi silently battling, the blood on their fingers slowly dripping onto the ground. Standing at the scene of the grand examination, It was as if he could see the past, a thin and weak youth silently stealthily amidst the wind and snow. His body that was extremely weak due to a serious illness was on the verge of collapse. But on the youth's young and tender face there wasn't a hint of fear or cowering. He stared at the back of the burly demon warrior in front of him, waiting for the other to fall before him. His eyes were filled with hatred and perseverance, looking like a wolf, because he was a wolf tribe youth. Just as Tang 36 had said, if Zheshio and Gohan Shi were to have a battle of life and death in the real world, it was hard to say who would be able to last until the end. However, the Education Palace was a miniature world, not the real world, so the one that could last until the end was still Gohan Shi, this Lee Mountain disciple that was born from a poor family, but was well versed in the scripture of the way. A creaking sound that was somewhat ear-piercing. The tightly shut door of the tower slowly opened. Gohan Shi slowly walked out from within. Arriving upon the stone steps, he painfully coughed twice. His face was a little pale, and his steps were a little slow. Guan Fei Bai and Liang Ban, who went up to greet him. Qi Jian was anxiously searching through his luggage for medicine. Zheshio also walked out of the tower. But he didn't walk out on his own. Rather, he was carried out. Blood continuously dripped down from the sides of the stretcher, a rather ghastly sight. His pale face was devoid of any expression. He looked very calm, his eyes were tightly shut. It was impossible to tell what he was currently thinking. He was like a wolf, following Gohan Shi in a silent and unwavering battle for over an hour, causing Gohan Shi to suffer rather heavy injuries. But he had also paid a heavy price for it. With his current injuries, it was impossible for him to continue battling. It could even be said that his life was in danger. He should have been sent out of the Education Palace to receive treatment. But previously, within the tower, when the Lee Palace clergyman in charge of the match was about to make such an arrangement, he was forced back by the apathetic expression and persistence in the youth's eyes. He could only carry him out of the tower. To be able to force Gohan Shi to such a state, Zheshio had earned the respect of all the examinees present, but in the end the word respect was based on the word fear. Everyone stared at the bleeding stretcher and the person within it. They remained silent. Not a single person went forward to express concern or comfort him. He was participating as a student of Star Caesar Academy, but in the previous round he had directly crippled a fellow student from Star Caesar Academy. Now Star Caesar Academy couldn't be bothered with him. The Lee Palace clergyman carried the stretcher. Looking at the examinees outside of the tower, they didn't know where to send him. At this moment, Chen Changsheng supported himself against the white poplar tree and stood up with difficulty. Luo understood his intentions. She patted Xian Yuan Po's back, indicating for him to go forward and take back the stretcher. Xian Yuan Po didn't dare to have any objections. He went forward and single-handedly took the stretcher. The stretcher arrived at the woodlands. Zheshio quietly laid upon it, his face pale and his body covered in blood, unable to move or speak, but he opened his eyes, appearing to be very calm. With a tearing sound, Xian Yuan Po began to bandage his wounds. Chen Changsheng fed him medicine. Luo looked at him. Her emotions were a little complicated. Tang 36 sighed. Is there a need to fight so bitterly? Zheshio looked at him, expressionlessly saying, Add money. The Zheshio mentioned here is naturally Zheng Haonan from the underworld. Cool. Today's 2,000 words. Chapter 171. Before the white crane landed, Qin Changxing had already noticed the abnormality in the small courtyard. As he sensed the remaining foul qi, his heart sank, as it was clearly left behind by the Yellow Springs art. Soon after, he noticed a few traces of fire. He couldn't help but think of a possibility, but he quickly rejected it. Why had Chusu come to this small courtyard? Just who had this battle taken place between him and Chen Changxing glanced at the unconscious Xian Yuan Pa, many questions rising in his mind, but the situation was too tense, leaving him no time to think too much. He had no idea that on the nearby eaves of the Celestial Tree Temple she was looking at him. Chun Changsheng walked past the broken door and the blackened scraps of paper into the room and saw Bianghong and Wu Qiongbai. Madame Mu had said that Bianghong and Wu Qiongbai were already dead. So why were they still alive? And why were they in Xian Yuan Po's small courtyard? Just what had happened. In his shock, Qin Changxing had no time to think. With a forceful wave of his hand, several hundred swords flew out of his sheath in a single line. With the clear cry of swords, they broke through the window and formed a South Stream temple sword array that tightly surrounded the small courtyard. Only now did he relax a little and place Xian Yuan upon the floor. Bianghong was also very shocked, but he was even more worried about the unconscious Xian Yuan Pa. Seeing that Chen Changxing was about to treat his injuries, he extended a hand to stop him. Take a look at him first. How did he suffer such heavy injuries? Is he in danger? Wu Qiongbai couldn't help but say, "This bear cub's skin is rough and his flesh is thick. What does it matter if he gets cut a few times?" Bianghong glanced at her, a tinge of anger finally appearing in his eyes. Wu Qiongbai felt quite wronged, thinking, "I'm just worried that your injuries will be difficult to treat if we drag them out." But when she met his gaze, she did not dare say anything. He was injured by the heavenly tome monoliths, affected by the power of the world. If he can wake up, he can still hold on. Qin Changxing repeated the judgment he had made on the observation platform. Ignoring Bianghong's attempts to stop him, he kneeled in front of him and began to feel his pulse. As time passed, his expression grew more and more grim, his fingers replaced by needles. After some time, he took out the needles, somewhat hesitant as to whether or not he should say something. Bianghong said nothing, only patted Qin Changxing on the shoulder. Only now did Qin Changxing realize that he already knew. "Please take a look at my wife's injuries." Bianghong had an extremely high cultivation level, so he had basically confirmed the state of his wife's injuries. But Qin Changxing's medical skill was universally acknowledged, so he wanted to confirm it. Qin Changxing turned to Wu Qiongbai and indicated for her to cooperate with him. Wu Qiongbai's expression was rather awkward, or perhaps uncomfortable. "It's not a big deal. I just need to rest and recuperate." Wu Qiongbai had lost an arm and appeared to be grievously injured, but Qin Changxing had clearly judged that her injuries were far lighter than Bianghong's. One could imagine just how many dangers Bianghong had blocked for her in the battle between the divine. If he had not blocked those terrifying attacks for Wu Qiongbai, things would definitely not be like this. Since they were husband and wife, it was natural for the husband to do these things for his wife. Qin Changxing was still in a rather bad mood, perhaps unwilling, just like the vast majority of people felt about this couple. Moreover, it was clear that Wu Qiongbai still did not know what was going on, did not know what Bianghong had done for her, what he had endured, and what he was about to endure. She was still nagging. Under Bianghong's gaze, Wu Qiongbai did not dare to say any obscenities, but it was still very vexing. Why did her husband have to bear everything while she could live like this? Qin Changxing raised his head and gave Bianghong a profound glance. Bianghong shook his head, his movements so small that if one was not staring, it would be very difficult to notice. Wu Qiongbai did not notice, but for some reason, perhaps because she had been affected by the mood, she finally grew quiet. The room became very quiet. Qin Changxing recalled the lotus sea in the mausoleum of books, the red flower, the heaven-shaking might of this couple, and then he looked at them powerlessly leaning against the wall, their pale faces, and suddenly felt very sad. Who was it? If the White Emperor was truly in secluded cultivation, not caring about outside matters, not even Madame Mu and the demi-human experts would have been able to force Bianghong and Wu Qiongbai into this state. Moreover, Madame Mu had personally said in the imperial city that she had not done anything. So, just who could wound Bianghong and Wu Qiongbai like this? Was it Black Robe and the Demon Commander, as he had guessed? Or was it the legendary 8 Great Mountain Men? Bianghong knew that he still had time. And he also knew that the following conversation would be extremely important to the human race in determining the future situation. Thus, he was in no rush to say the name of his opponent, but very seriously and logically began to recount his entire experience. We followed the deep freeze dragon breath and saw Lady Zhusha under the third celestial tree from the left. Chen Chongqing finally knew the little black dragon's specific location. He thought to himself, it was probably the legendary heavenly flames of the desolate tree that had cut off her mental connection to him. Byung-hong continued, we saw Madame Mu and Mu Jiushi and also Black Robe. Even though he had anticipated this, Qin Chongqing was still shocked to hear this name. Who else of the demons came? None, just Black Robe alone. Qin Chongqing could not understand. If Madame Mu had only activated the seal to prevent communication and had not truly attacked Byung-hong and his wife, then Black Robe alone should not have been able to wound Byung-hong and Wu Qiong to such a degree. This enigmatic demon military advisor was unquestionably a true expert, his strength unfathomable. But Byung-hong was also no ordinary expert of the divine domain, especially in the years after the coup of the Mausoleum of Books. His strength had risen once more, and he seemed to be on the verge of becoming the leader of the storms of the 8 directions. Given another 200 years, he might even be able to break through the saint realm and enter the concealed divinity realm. The demons did not send anyone else, but the sacred light continent did. Byung-hong slowly said, 2 angels of the sacred light came. One is in charge of judgment, which I would like to call Hidden Thunder. The other is in charge of war, which I would like to call Flames of Fury. The 2 do not understand the Tao, but they can transform the laws of the world for their own use. They are naturally divine, and purely in terms of fighting power, they are similar to me. Qin Chongqing was truly shocked. For a long time he was speechless. Without waiting for him to ask any further questions, Byung-hong spoke again. His expression was abnormally serious. It was clear that he hoped that Chen Chongqing would remember every word he said. If you meet them, please kill them. With these words, a powerful killing intent surged like a banner or spear, piercing through the courtyard and reaching the heavens. At the same time, Byung-hong's finger pressed against Chen Chongqing's brow. To be continued. Chapter 172. Byung-hong was heavily injured and moved very slowly. Chen Chongqing could have easily dodged, but he did not, because he trusted in his opponent. Wu Qiong stared at this sight and thought of something. She was shocked and wanted to stop it, but she recalled Byung-hong's previous words and did not dare. An incomparably warm and mellow qi, like that of fine wine, followed Byung-hong's finger into Chen Chongqing's forehead and poured in. The sea of consciousness was just below the forehead. Otherwise, Nank's eyes would not have widened further and further. Countless rays of light illuminated Chen Chongqing's gloomy sea of consciousness, then transformed into countless images. They were scenes of Byung-hong's battle with the 2 angels on the plateau and in the sky. Those images were very clear and vivid, as if they were right in front of his eyes. They were incomparably real. The scenes from the first-person perspective allowed him to stand in Byung-hong's position and personally experience everything that had happened. He saw Mu Jiushi fleeing in fear, saw the calm and graceful Madame Mu. There was a tree on the edge of the cliff. The breeze lifted the shadow of the tree, forming a corner of the black robe. There were clouds in the sky, and as the clouds parted, light descended upon the world. Inside the light were 2 powerful beings from a foreign continent. They had pure white wings and were genderless. They emitted a holy light and an incomparably powerful aura, making it impossible for others to look at them directly. They seemed extremely arrogant, but in reality, they did not have any positive or negative human emotions. Between their brows was an indifference that transcended the mortal world. In a way, they were perfect. They were the angels of the sacred light continent. Qin Chongqing also heard their voices. They were probably using the language of the sacred light continent, their tones strange and complex. Because these scenes had been created by Byung-hong's spiritual sense. Their voices had not been transformed by a breeze into the language of the continent as they had been on that day. Chun Chang-sheng understood a little. The language of the sacred light continent was somewhat similar to that of the dragon race. When he was reciting the last volume of the 3,000 scriptures of the Taoist canon in Xining Village's old temple, he was already extremely familiar with the language of the dragon race. More importantly, he had once studied under New North Bridge with Gigi for a very long time. The one who stole the fire source? What did that mean? Just as he was pondering this question, the two angels from the sacred light continent attacked. A straight line of light appeared in front of him, cutting the sky into two parts. As the ray of light turned back in defiance of the laws and principles of heaven and earth, it landed from another angle. The two angels attacked faster and faster, and so did the light. The sky was gradually cut into countless fine fragments. Countless, wondrous attacks emerged one after another, and unimaginable angles of attack appeared one after another. Even with Chan Changsheng's level, it was getting harder and harder to see all the details, but he still perceived many things from it. It was the true experience and wisdom gained from his battle with the two angels. It was the red flower illuminating the sky and severing the trajectories of light. It was the mark left behind by that fist that had shattered the clouds and disregarded the laws of the world. Through Byung-hong's fingertip, it all entered his sea of consciousness. As time passed, the rays of light became denser and denser. They crisscrossed and intersected, gradually forming a blazing white. A boom resounded in Chen Changsheng's sea of consciousness. Countless huge waves were born, constantly crashing against the invisible but bounded embankment. Chun Chang-sheng woke up. Apart from a slight ache in his sea of consciousness, he didn't feel any other discomfort. Then he felt a little hot. More accurately, the surface of his body was boiling hot. He performed meditative introspection and realized that all paths in his ethereal palace were connected. The snowy plain of star radiance was burning. The fire was not very fierce, but the surface of the vast snowy plain was burning, the dark blue flames extending into the distance. Byung-hong's finger had left his brow, but the experience from that battle, and even more importantly, the understanding and wisdom of an expert of the divine domain regarding the laws of the world, as well as the intense desire to fight and even to kill those two angels from the sacred light continent, all remained in his sea of consciousness. Without question, this was Chen Changsheng's best state since the garden of Zhou's 10,000 swords forming dragon. The several hundred swords quietly floating outside the room sensed his change. The swords trembled and let out a low hum. All of White Emperor City felt a peerlessly powerful and awe-inspiring sword intent. The priests and bear warriors in the streets subconsciously retreated even further away. After some time, Chen Changsheng opened his eyes and suppressed the desire to fight. The awe-inspiring sword intent enveloping the small courtyard also receded. He knew that on the long path of cultivation, the wisdom that Byung-hong had left in his sea of consciousness would help him avoid many detours. And if he were to encounter those experts from the sacred light continent, the experience and desire to fight in his sea of consciousness would help him obtain even more strength. Byung-hong glanced at the unconscious Shen Yuanpa and said, "I once mentioned to him the fist style I used in my battle with those two. In the future, if he still has any interest in or questions about this path, I would like to ask your holiness to help me instruct him." He was very fond of this bear youth and felt that there was fate between them. Coupled with the fact that the two of them had received a favor from him, he had given him some pointers yesterday. He had originally planned to truly teach this fist style to Shen Yuanpa today, but now it seemed that he could only entrust it to Chun Changsheng. Chun Changsheng replied, "He has always been a person of the Orthodox Academy. Please be at ease, Senior." In those images he had seen the appearance and fighting style of the two angels, but he still had many questions. especially the sacred light exuded by those two angels, which he was far too familiar with. His flesh and blood were filled with this sacred light. Was this the origin of the name foreign continent? The 3,000 scriptures of the Taoist canon did not have many records of the distant and mysterious sacred light continent. Only a few extremely ancient texts would mention it in the name of myth. As a child, Qin Changsheng had been well versed in the Taoist canon and had read many books. He might have been born on the sacred light continent, but in the first 10-some years of his life, he had no understanding of the sacred light continent. At the very beginning, he did not even know of the existence of the sacred light continent. Only when Su Li left with the Holy Maiden of the South and he and Su Yurong discussed the possible whereabouts of these two seniors on the Bridge of Helplessness did he have this idea. And only during the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, when he followed the Tianhai Divine Empress's eyes and saw that monk, did he confirm that the sacred light continent truly existed. The descendants of the deceased really had fled to that side, and there were also countless experts beneath the starry sky. And then came that night in the snowy mountains. That mighty demon lord who had once almost dominated the continent had died under a pillar of light from that side of the starry sky. That pillar of light had shaken the entire continent, and it had also made Qin Changsheng extremely vigilant and uneasy. He had not forgotten what the Tianhai Divine Empress had done before her death. She had ignited the last of her soul to heavily injure that monk by the Sheaning stream, completely uncaring that her legacy had been severed. At the time, no one understood why she had done this. Now, Qin Changsheng understood. To be continued. Chapter 173. Qin Changsheng still didn't understand some things. On that night, in the Mausoleum of Books, the monk from the other continent had not come in his true body, but had used some sort of method to arrive as a soul. The two angels from the sacred light continent that Bianhong had encountered were clearly physical. So how had they gotten here? If it was so easy to travel between the two continents, why hadn't anyone from the sacred light continent appeared before? He posed his question to Bianhong, and then he asked how the descendants had been able to escape to the sacred light continent, and what method had they used. More importantly, what was the relationship between the demon race and the sacred light continent? Bianhong did not give a specific answer, as he was not confident that his conjecture was correct and did not want to affect Qin Changsheng's judgment. He said to Qin Changsheng, regarding these matters, you should ask your teacher. There was nothing wrong with these words. Shang Xingzhou was definitely the person in this world who understood the sacred light continent the most. He had picked up Chen Changxing by the stream, driven away the golden dragon, and invited the soul of the monk from the exiled tribe to this world to attack the Tianhai Divine Empress. His shadow, or rather his participation, could be found in all matters concerning the sacred light continent, and those events were all related to Qin Changsheng. He didn't know what to say. Bianhong solemnly warned him, Your Holiness must be careful. Qin Changsheng understood his meaning. In the battle between the divine 2 days ago, Madame Mu and the demons had openly encircled and killed the human experts. Even more alarming was that this had involved the other races in space. The human race had to give the strongest response, and as the Pope, Qin Changsheng naturally had to shoulder this responsibility, but he also had to face enormous pressure. Most importantly, he had to figure out what Shang Xingzhou was thinking. Those were things for the future. He had a lot of things to deal with now. Qin Changxing glanced at Wu Qiongbai. Wu Qiongbai fiercely glared back. Qin Changxing drew back his gaze and asked Bianhong, You really don't need to say anything? Bianhong shook his head. Qin Changxing once again looked at the unconscious Xian Yuanpa. Xian Yuanpo's body was extremely sturdy, and his face was covered with a beard. He looked a little old, but in reality he was the youngest in the Tradition Academy. Qin Changsheng, Tang 36, Su Mou, Zhixiu, and the others liked to tease Xian Yuanpa and doted on him. He didn't know when Xian Yuanpa would wake up. Chen Changsheng walked out of the courtyard and told the Archbishop of the Western Wastes that no one was allowed to take a step into the alley. The Archbishop softly assented. He did not ask the foolish question of what to do if someone came. Since no one was allowed to step into the alley, not even the White Emperor and Madame Mu, Shang Xingzhou, or the Emperor could enter. Sensing the qi of several dozen experts in the streets of the pine paths, as well as the clear qi of Li Palace's array, Chen Changsheng felt somewhat relieved. With the cry of a crane, he rode the white crane and flew into the sky. The hundreds of swords around the courtyard whistled through the air and followed him. He knew that everything should be fine over there, but he still couldn't help but feel worried and nervous. Thus, he did not notice that the white crane had glanced at the celestial tree temple before it left, as if it was asking for instructions from someone. Upon confirming that Chen Changxing had left, Wu Qiong instantly regained her spirit and roared at Bianghong. "Is there something wrong with your head? What if something happens?" This was referring to the fact that Bianghong had used only one finger to transmit the experience and wisdom of that battle between the divine to Chen Changxing. This was a technique that had been secretly passed down in Shiling's 10,000 years pavilion for more than 7,000 years. It was called the dot of red. A teacher could use this method to directly transmit the knowledge of cultivation to their disciples. This sort of Taoist technique was very mystical, but it was also dangerous. The slightest carelessness would result in a backlash from the Taoist technique. In the past, only before the grand examination or the opening of the Garden of Zhou would the 10,000 years pavilion choose the most outstanding but inexperienced students to use this technique on. If this Taoist technique was used to transmit energy to later generations of disciples, it was even more dangerous. Death was basically assured for both the user and the recipient. For this reason, in the last 7,000 years, this sort of thing had only happened twice in Shiling's 10,000 years pavilion. As she watched Bianghong's finger land on Chen Changxing's forehead, Wu Qiong was truly rather worried. Her anger was also rather reasonable. Bianghong quietly gazed at her, saying nothing. Wu Qiong suddenly recalled that in the last 2 days he had often quietly gazed at her like this, and then recalled that in the last 2 years he had often quietly gazed at the distant mountains. She then recalled the words that the people of the world had said to the two of them, and the words that those people had used their eyes to say, like Wang Pa and the others. She suddenly felt flustered and uneasily shut her mouth. Bianghong had been married to her for many years, so he naturally knew what she was thinking. He faintly smiled and rubbed her head. Wu Qiong felt even more flustered, because although Bianghong had still respected and protected her in the last few years, it had been a very long time since he had made such an intimate gesture. In order to dispel her unease, she somewhat stiffly changed the subject, asking, "Why didn't you tell him that Su Yorong came?" The holy maiden did not appear, indicating that she did not want Chen Changxing to know, so it was naturally inconvenient for me to say anything. Bianghong thought this over, then earnestly said, "In the future, you must treat His Holiness and the Holy Maiden a little more respectfully." Wu Qiong angrily retorted, "I can't be bothered to do these hypocritical things. In any case, they won't do anything out of respect for you. Are you really prepared to abandon me?" Bianghong said nothing, only sighed. Wu Qiong recalled his previous actions and once more became uneasy. She mumbled, "If worst comes to worst, I'll just change my temper and kill a few less people." Bianghong still said nothing. Wu Qiong's expression turned unsightly. "Could it be that you really intend to cast me aside?" The more she thought about it, the more she felt that it was true. Anxious and angry, tears began to stream down her face, and then she began to curse. To Bianghong, the contents of her curses were truly nothing new. Over and over again it was the same words: "Heartless old scoundrel, ungrateful poor scholar, if not for me back then, what would have happened?" But just when he was truly beginning to get angry, Wu Qiong wept and said, "I don't have an arm now, and I don't even have a son. If you leave, what will happen to me?" Byung-hong sighed and took her into his embrace, lightly patting her back to prevent her from crying herself to death. Her temper was just this great. He had always known that there was nothing he could do about it. After some time, Wu Qiongbai grew tired from crying and cursing. Leaning against his chest, she fell into a deep sleep. Even in her sleep, her left hand tightly gripped his collar as if afraid that he would just quietly leave. Byung-hong did not sleep. He quietly gazed at her face, his thoughts inscrutable. The clouds over the mountains dispersed. The faint sound of waves could be heard from below the distant cliff. Chun Chong-sheng walked down from the white crane and walked forward. In front of him was a celestial tree that towered into the clouds. At the base of the tree was a large hole. Inside was a small house. A black-clothed girl quietly stood in front of the house. To be continued. Chapter 174. The black-clothed girl was naturally the little black dragon. As the protector, she had a spiritual sense connection with Chun Chongsheng that was difficult to sever. Thus, even though she had remained silent, Chun Chongsheng could confirm that she was safe. But this connection had been cut off by the wildfire of the celestial tree, making it impossible for Chun Chongsheng to determine her exact location. But with Byung-hong's directions, finding her was extremely easy. The celestial tree was so tall that even its hollow could hold a house, so the little black dragon's body was naturally even more delicate and delicate. Chun Chongsheng's gaze fell on her ankle. When he saw the chain, he couldn't help but recall the scene he had often seen at the bottom of New North Bridge, and his heart sank. The little black dragon looked at him and asked, "Why did you come so late?" Chun Chongsheng was brimming with apologies, but he didn't know how to explain. The little black dragon's gaze passed over his shoulder and fell on the white crane, and her face instantly turned as cold as ice. Chun Chongsheng did not notice the change in her mood, and even if he did, he probably wouldn't understand the reason. He walked up to Zhu Sha and squatted down, beginning to study the chain that imprisoned her. A rain of swords came from the bottom of the tree. In an extremely short amount of time, 10 some famed swords, the stainless sword included, had descended, but they were unable to sever the chain. Unlike the chains at the bottom of New North Bridge, this chain was not shrouded in a divine aura to isolate attacks. Instead, it seemed to have fused with the entire cliff. There seemed to be some sort of array hidden within that could divert all attacks that landed on the chains to the cliff itself. In other words, if he wanted to sever the chain, he needed to destroy the entire cliff. Destroying this cliff was not something impossible for the current Chun Chongsheng. The problem was that it could shake the foundation of the celestial tree. What would he do if the wildfire spewed out of the ground? He could ride the white crane to escape, but could he just watch as the little black dragon was swallowed up by the wildfire? Since he couldn't, he could only think of another way to break the array. He thought of the name of this seal and wondered if there was some sort of explanation for it. The little black dragon snapped, "The White Emperor clan has always been white tigers, and this thing is used to imprison their own clansmen. Isn't it only right that it has this name?" Chun Chongsheng said, "Luo Luo is looking for the key. I'm just worried that it'll take too long. If the tiger paw is also an array, I want to write a letter to Yurong. She should be able to think of a way." Back then, he had asked Su Yurong for guidance on how to break the seal at the bottom of New North Bridge. Although it had been the Pope who had acted in the end, she truly was formidable in this aspect. The frosty expression on the little black dragon's face completely vanished as she angrily yelled, "Riding another woman's crane to save me! You can even do something like that." Chun Chongsheng was stunned and asked, "What is it?" The little black dragon was even angrier, shouting, "You still want her to save me? She had to save me twice. What kind of brain do you have?" Chun Chongsheng truly felt that his brain was not very good, because he had no idea why the little black dragon was so angry or what it meant. He and the black dragon had lived in the snowy mountains of the northern border for 3 years, eating, walking, and living together. They were already extremely close, but there were many times when he still did not quite understand her intentions. Ride another woman's crane? She had to save him twice? What kind of matter was this? He subconsciously explained, "She's my fiancée, so there's no need to be polite." The black dragon hatefully retorted, "You're my first man, so why have you been so polite to me all these years?" The highest point of the celestial tree was already far above the clouds. The sunlight shone upon the branches, creating a golden glow. It was a very beautiful sight. A pair of pure white wings, slowly folded. Su Yurong stood on a branch, her wings lightly swaying in the wind. She stretched out her hand and plucked a fire berry from the leaves, her bright eyes brimming with curiosity. She carefully took a bite, and after a long while, she nodded in satisfaction. In the next moment, her expression subtly changed, no longer so satisfied. It was not because the chi of the wildfire contained in this legendary fireberry was too thick, harming her, but because she had heard the conversation carried over by the wind from below. Riding my crane to see another woman is one thing, but it's two of them. Mo, you really didn't lie to me back then. There really is a problem between you and them. Chun Changsheng came to his senses and knew where the problem lay. It had been a very long time since they had met at the bottom of New North Bridge. He had long ago known what had happened and what she had always been thinking. At the time, he had braved the immense danger of meditative introspection and ignited the snowy plains formed from star radiance, almost burning them into nothingness. At that crucial moment, the black dragon had cut open her forehead and used the true blood of the frost dragon to save him. And it was the most precious and purest first blood. According to the rules of the dragon race, she had chosen Qin Changxing to be her husband by doing this. In the following years, especially those 3 years on the snowy plains of the northern frontier, she had always been thinking about this matter. She was the one Qin Changxing should be most grateful to for being able to live to this day, but even though he could have used his life without hesitation to save her, he found it impossible to accept this matter, because he already had an engagement, even if that engagement had been annulled midway. Previously, he had simply not known how to face this situation, so he had subconsciously stopped himself from thinking in that direction. In truth, this sort of conversation brimming with hatred and apology had taken place many times between him and the black dragon. In the end, it still ended with his silence. In the end, it was still the black dragon who broke this silence. "You good-for-nothing thing you don't dare to marry two? Including Luo, that's only 3. You, the Pope, can't even raise them? Are you that afraid of Su Yurong?" She sneered at Qin Changsheng. "Let's not talk about this. Go do what you need to do, but be careful. Don't force Madame Mu into a corner, or else she really will dare to kill you." Qin Changsheng worriedly asked, "Then what will you do?" The black dragon proudly replied, "No one dares to kill a noble black frost dragon on the shores of the Red River." Qin Changsheng did not completely believe this. He knew that the demi-human race truly did have to thank the black frost dragon tribe for their assistance in establishing their country, but ungrateful people were common. And who could guarantee that Madame Mu would not go crazy? But there was truly no point in him staying here. He thought it over, then said, "Sorry." The black dragon helplessly said, "Qin Changxing, I am your protector. Do you really want to hear me say these 3 words? The white crane flew off once more. The black dragon gazed at the place where the crane had vanished and suddenly gave a soft sigh. At this moment, there was no hint of arrogance on her face, no sneer of condescension, no ruthlessness. There was only a faint tinge of loneliness. At this moment, she was just an ordinary black-clothed girl watching her lover depart into the distance. A voice came from the celestial tree. Loneliness only needs one person, but loneliness needs 2, because it is the yearning that comes after separation. The little black dragon warily gazed over, and then she saw Su Yurong. Su Yurong calmly said to her, The problem is that he is my man, so how can you be lonely because of him? Chapter 175. The Black Dragon had never seen Su Yurong before, but she knew that this person was Su Yurong. The rumors were true. Su Yurong truly was very beautiful, and even she had to admit it. But she had not expected Su Yurong to say such a thing the first time they met. Those words might have sounded rather artistic, but how could she not hear the declaration hidden within? No, there was no concealment. Su Yurong had made no attempt to conceal anything, clearly declaring her ownership of Chen Chongsheng. The rumored pure and holy maiden actually had such a strong possessive desire? The Black Dragon even thought of those vulgar and low-class female dragons on the southern islands and jeered, "Do you want to pee on him?" These words were truly vulgar, but Su Yurong did not get angry. She calmly said, "Perhaps there are other ways to resolve it." The Black Dragon coldly stared at her. "How do you want to resolve it?" Su Yurong glanced at her ankle and indifferently said, "I have no way of removing the seal in a short amount of time, and I also don't want him to always remember this matter and feel even more apologetic towards you. Thus, I've decided that in the future, I'll spend some time with you every day. This way you won't be lonely and you won't mistakenly think that loneliness is loneliness." The Black Dragon angrily retorted, "I don't need your company. Just looking at you makes me annoyed." Su Yurong smiled. "You're his protector, so I naturally have to take good care of you and thank you." The Black Dragon sneered, "What does that have to do with you? He's my man." Su Yurong did not get angry at these words, nor did she argue. She stroked her black hair and smiled. "Good girl." The Black Dragon was extremely depressed. She desperately shook her head, wanting to escape her grasp, but to no avail. Seeing her like this, Su Yurong happily said, "How cute!" The Black Dragon was infuriated and yelled, "I'm going to eat you!" Su Yurong smiled. "It's fine as long as you don't think about eating him." The Black Dragon froze for a moment before understanding what she meant. Her face instantly blushed, and she spat. "Woman, how could you be so shameless?" "My apologies, sir. I was unable to find the key." Luo Luo raised her head and glanced at Qin Chongsheng, somewhat uneasy. This was the highest stone hall in the imperial city. She had lived here the entire time in White Emperor City. Qin Chongsheng wasn't surprised by this answer, but he was surprised by Luo Luo's fear. In the Orthodox Academy, Luo Luo had been just as adorable as she was now, but she would never reveal this sort of expression. What exactly happened? Or was it that Madame Mu wanted to marry her off to Shualao City, and this matter not only hurt her heart, but also made her very afraid? Luo Luo glanced at the white crane outside the window. Looking at his expression, she asked cautiously, "Will Shirmu be unhappy?" Qin Chongsheng was startled and asked, "Why is she unhappy?" He truly did not understand why Su Yurong was unhappy, nor did he understand why the little Black Dragon had said that there was something wrong with his head. Seeing his response, Luo Luo relaxed a little, but she was still a little nervous. She asked tentatively, "Sir, you won't blame me?" Qin Chongsheng remembered that when Luo Luo left the capital, she told him in a letter that she lied to him. In reality, she was the same age as him, only a few months younger. Was she worried that he would blame her for this? Qin Chongsheng was speechless. He turned to her and prepared to say something, but he froze. They had clearly been separated for 5 years, but Luolua's appearance was still the same, immature, and adorable to the extreme, just like a child. What was going on here? Her cultivation level should not have reached this level. Or did the demi-human race also have a secret technique similar to South Stream temples to preserve one's appearance? "Sir?" Luo Luo softly reminded him. Qin Chongsheng came to his senses and said, "I truly am a little angry." Luo Luo nervously thought, "Could Sir have heard what Xin Yuan said? Or could it be that he heard what I said? Sir knows that I like him, so he's angry?" Qin Chongsheng asked, "Since you already heard the news, why didn't you write a letter to the Li Palace asking for reinforcements. I'm your teacher, so I naturally wouldn't abandon you. Luo Luo froze at Qin Chongsheng's words, and then she felt extremely sweet. Yes, how could Sir leave me alone? At the most dangerous moment, he would assuredly break through the clouds and bring me away in golden light. But if I had told the Li Palace of this matter from the start, the human race might have other ways to deal with it. Sir, would you have personally come? Luo Luo thought to herself, I have to hide my intentions from Sir, even if I have to hide it for the rest of my life. It would be wonderful if I could have a lifetime. Senior Bianghong is about to leave. Qin Changsheng's gloomy voice shattered her slightly sweet and sour thoughts. The meaning of leave was not to leave White Emperor City, but to leave the world. Luo Luo was shocked, and then she became sad. This sadness was because of that senior she had never met, and also because of something else. An expert of the divine domain had been murdered and died in White Emperor City. In the end, an explanation had to be given for this matter. Was it truly time for the human race and the demi-human race to part? She had just reunited with Sir. But would it be difficult to meet him again? She grabbed Chen Chongsheng's belt, her small face brimming with hidden bitterness. Sir, I am not willing. Qin Chongsheng had failed to dodge, as her movements were as fast as lightning. Besides the increase in her cultivation, it was also because she had done this action countless times. Back in the Orthodox Academy, every time Qin Chongsheng drove her back to the 100-her garden, or when she returned to the Li Palace or the Imperial Palace, she would use this method to stall for time. She also had an even more practiced action that could stall for even longer. She would lean over and hug Qin Chongsheng's thigh, but she was still a little older, so she was somewhat embarrassed to do this. Qin Chongsheng replied, It's not as serious as you think. It's just that since you've done something, you have to pay the price. If the human race did not pursue the death of an expert of the divine domain, White Emperor City would inevitably have to pay an extremely heavy price. His words were not explicit, but the target his sword was pointing at was extremely clear. Luo Luo whispered, Mother, she is pregnant. This was telling Qin Chongsheng that Madame Mu's status would become even more stable. But correspondingly, her status and weight in the demi-human race would be greatly weakened. But it's fine. I will work hard. Luo Luo cutely stuck out her tongue. What used to be a cheerful smile now looked so forced, even a little heavy. Qin Chongsheng felt a great deal of pity as he gazed at her small face. You don't need to do anything. Luo Luo looked at him and very seriously said, Teacher, in truth, I have many supporters. I just thought that Sir would come to save me anyway, so I didn't do anything. Qin Chongsheng replied, Even if you can do many things, don't do them. Luo Luo opened her eyes wide and asked, Why is that? Qin Chongsheng rubbed her head and said, Because she's your mother, and also because I happen to know that you like to stand at very high places. Luo Luo truly did like to stand at high places, like the great banyan tree by the lake in the Orthodox Academy, the Hall of Pure Virtue in the Li Palace or this Palace Hall. Those who did not understand her would think that this most revered princess in the world liked to look down on others from high places. But Qin Chongsheng knew that this was not the case. Luo Luo liked to stand at very high places because only there could she see very far away places. How can a girl who likes to see far away stay here to be empress? Qin Chongsheng earnestly said to her. Luo Luo stared at him in a daze, then suddenly threw herself into his embrace and tightly hugged him. Her small face rubbed against his chest as she made happy noises. The noises were very soft, sometimes mewing, sometimes snoring. It sounded like a kitten that had just eaten its fill and had its fur stroked 800 times. An old comrade has released another new book, Chronicles of Rivers and Mountains and Beauties, Navigating the Tides, The Official Road Without Bounds, author Rue Zhen's new book, Beacon Emperor. It's a historical fantasy genre, rising from the wilderness, making a name for oneself on the battlefield, and sweeping through the imperial court. This book will give you a different kind of fantasy experience. http://book/1003779-332. ASPX, to be continued. Chapter 176. Luo Luo was very moved by Chen Chongqing's words. But in Chen Chongqing's view, this was a matter of course. Whether it was the demi-human empress or someone else, if you wanted to do it, then do it. If you didn't want to do it, then don't do it. It could not be influenced by any other factor, not even the future of the continent. When Tang 36 had said that he did not want to be head of the Tang clan, he had also taken this stance. Luo Luo knew what he was thinking, but this matter of course made her even more moved. After some time, she reluctantly left his embrace. She looked at him and softly said, "I don't believe father will support mother's opinion." Chen Chongqing was quiet for a while, then said, "I also hope so, but I'm not too sure." Abandoning the alliance with the human race and allying with the demons was a turning point in history for the demi-human race and the entire continent. For the demi-human race's future, any choice the White Emperor made could be imagined. Based on Chen Chongqing's reasoning, there were some problems that were not easy to explain. For instance, when the Tian High Divine Empress had shaken the entire continent, why had the White Emperor not been wary of the human race? It was because they had not been standing high enough and could not see far enough. At the time, the internal problems of the human race had not been resolved. Shang Xingzhou had been quietly watching the capital from the riverbank, and the Pope had been watching the imperial palace from the Li Palace with complex emotions. In those years, the White Emperor had secretly supported Shang Xingzhou, probably out of consideration for balancing the factions within the human race. Later on, the Tian High Divine Empress died, and many experts of the human race died. This also meant that the human race no longer had any major internal conflicts. A unified will had always been the most frightening thing, and the demon race was now much weaker because of its internal strife. From every angle, the demi-human race seemed to have a natural need to ally with the demon race. Thus, Chen Chongqing could not make any firm judgments about the White Emperor's stance. It now seemed that the greatest hope for him and the human race lay in the opposition within the demi-human race. The mood in White Emperor City was extremely oppressive. Patrolling soldiers and somber beast guards could be seen everywhere. Quite a few of the usually bustling shops on the western side of the street were closed, and the populace rarely ventured out. It was abnormally quiet. Compared to the mood in the city, the vast plains on the two shores of the Red River were even more tense. Just like the wildfire beneath the celestial trees, it seemed like it could explode at any moment. The Blackstone Army stationed at Wild Mountain Pass had a riot last night. Great Goblin General, he had only managed to stabilize the situation with great difficulty, and no major changes had occurred. Even the most disciplined and elite of the demi-human race, the Beast Cavalry, was somewhat shaken, not to mention the miscellaneous troops stationed in the mountains, as well as the large and small tribes. According to reports from various places, in the short span of 2 days, there had already been many bloody conflicts among the demon race army, and the various tribes had already begun to assemble their troops. This was the signal of war, the omen of a storm. What was about to happen was not a war with the demon race or the human race, but a war between the two major forces of the demon race. The entire demon race had already been clearly divided into two factions. Madame Mu represented the will of the imperial clan, and the Council of Elders, represented by the Xiong clan leader, supported the alliance with the demons. Standing on the opposite side was Lolua's side. They had the Prime Minister as their representative civil official system and the support of many tribes. They hoped to maintain their friendship with the human race. The former's strength was greater than the latter's, but the problem was that the latter's attitude was very unyielding and had the strong support of the human race represented by Chen Chongqing. If Madame Mu wanted to forcefully announce the letter to the world, the demi-human race might really be plunged into civil war. No one was willing to see this sight. So before the conflict finally escalated, both the Xiong clan leader and the other demi-human personages first hoped to persuade the other side through negotiations. Thus, in the last 2 days, there were very few pedestrians on the streets of White Emperor City, while the residences of the elders and ministers were packed with guests. Even the imperial court had stopped. The two most lively places were the Xiong clan's estate and the Taoist church of the Western Wastes. The former was because the demon lord was probably still in that large courtyard extremely close to the Xiong clan's estate, currently under the Xiong clan's protection. The latter was because Chun Changsheng was living there. The Pope of the human race and the demon lord were in the same city, separated by Tensum Li. This was a sight that had never before appeared in history. The atmosphere of the city naturally became unprecedentedly strange. Many tribal leaders, merchants, and officials entered the Xiong clan's estate, only to come out after some time. From their expressions, it was impossible to tell what had happened in the estate, what their discussions with the demon lord had been like, or even whether they had seen the demon lord. In short, everything seemed very mysterious. Chun Changsheng used an entire day to receive the representatives of the various factions. The Bear tribe leader and the Shur clan leader introduced the leaders of many small tribes to pay their respects. The Taoist church of the Western Wastes was instantly overcrowded. When those two young Ming clan representatives entered the Taoist church and used the firmest of tones to express their support for the human race, Qin Changsheng was very shocked. It was not because they were too enthusiastic that made him suspicious, but because he recognized them. Many years ago, when he went from Xining village to the capital, wanting to enter the Six Ivies, he had encountered a pair of hunter brothers from the Elder's Ridge. In the end, those hunter brothers successfully entered Star Caesar Academy and became glorious officers of the Great Zhou. He had never imagined that these hunter brothers were actually demi-humans. Now that he thought about it, this was naturally a collaboration between the Great Zhou army and the Ming clan. Back then, the principal of Star Caesar Academy, Chen Guansong, had been a truly extraordinary individual. It was no wonder that Shang Xingzhou believed him to be the best candidate for the next leader of the Great Zhou army. Alas, in the end, he had died in the Tianhai Divine Empress's final phoenix fire. His grand plans and schemes had all come to nothing, but fortunately, he had left behind some shade for his descendants. Deep in the night, the representatives and officials of the various races that had come to pay their respects to Chun Changsheng withdrew from the Taoist church of the Western Wastes, leaving only the most important personages behind. They were now the staunchest representatives of the human race's allies. The events of the day had filled them with even more confidence, but there were still some matters that made them very uneasy. If His Majesty leaves seclusion, he can decide everything with a single word. Even if he is injured and needs to quietly cultivate, how can he not appear in the face of such a major event? The Prime Minister fell quiet for a very long time in response to the Bear tribe leader's questions, and then he said this. In the last few years, no one has personally seen His Majesty, not even I. A few days ago, the chief elder went to sense His Majesty's spiritual sense. The Shur clan leader expressionlessly said, Old Xiong is the most patient and most forbearing person I have ever seen in my life. No matter how I think about it, I cannot understand why he would jump out this time. Moreover, all the tribes along the two shores of the Red River know that his relationship with the Empress is not very good. Just because of a strand of His Majesty's spiritual sense, he changed? If he really is one of the Empress's people, who can be sure that he wasn't lying that night? After listening to this extremely quiet discussion, Chen Chongqing fell quiet for a very long time. He knew that these demi-human personages were using this method to remind him, to warn him. But this matter was far too inconceivable, so even though there was no one around, they only dared to use these vague and ambiguous words to mention it. No matter what it is, you have to see it with your own eyes in order to judge whether it's true or false. I do not want the demi-human race to start a civil war, but the present situation must be broken as quickly as possible. After a pause, Qin Changxing said, "I will go see His Majesty the White Emperor." Chapter 177. There were no clouds in the night sky, only stars scattered everywhere like sesame seeds. There seemed to be no pattern to them, and they were smooth and uniform in every direction. Qin Changxing stood by the window and looked at the starry sky that was indeed closer than the ground. He repeated the previous conversation. Luo Luo stood at his side, her left hand grabbing his sleeve out of habit. She tilted her head and thought for a moment before saying, "Then let's go see him." Qin Changxing glanced at her and said, "This matter needs to be done in secret. Your mother can't find out." The Shi clan leader had already drawn the rough location of Emperor Bai's seclusion on the map and handed it over to him. If he wanted to go there, he had to go through a secret passage in the palace. In his view, although Luo Luo was a noble princess, under Madame Mu's deliberate suppression, she should not have much control over the imperial city. Luo Luo blinked her eyes and said seriously, "Sir, don't worry. I'm your student. I'm capable of doing these things." Qin Changxing felt that these words had the flavor of Su Li or Tang 36, and he couldn't help but laugh. Walking out from the damp and dark, but not cold stone path, on the contrary, it was stuffy and hot. A snowy mountain, along with the morning light, entered Qin Changxing's eyes. The snowy mountain was thousands of feet high. Below it were black cliffs and primeval forests. The top half of the mountain was completely covered in white snow. Under the morning light, it glowed with a dazzling light. It rose abruptly from the lakeside and extended towards the north. It was impossible to see the end of it. It even made people wonder whether it would continue to the end of the world. It seemed extremely majestic, like a miracle. Qin Changxing knew that this snowy mountain that stretched for countless miles was the Starfall Mountains that were often mentioned in ancient records. The Starfall Mountains grew along the western coast and suddenly protruded out of the earth to the north of White Emperor City. To the left, 100-some li, was the ocean, its peaks covered in snow that had accumulated for tens of thousands of years. The mountain range also stretched for tens of thousands of li, all the way to the extreme north. In the middle was a relatively flat plain known as Jianling. After traveling southeast for 10-some days and nights, they arrived at the westernmost Song Province Army headquarters. Between Jianling and the Song Province Army headquarters was a grassland that was the homeland of the elves. Now it belonged to Qin Changxing and Su Yurong. Qin Changxing walked to the lakeside and looked at the opposite mountain range. He recalled the records in the Taoist canon that the Red River had originated from one of these snowy peaks. And then he recalled the connection between him and that plain, and he felt a strange sensation. Ever since the demi-human race established their kingdom on the Red River, countless generations of white emperors and empresses had been buried in the Starfall Mountains. According to the rules of the ancestral spirits, in order to prevent evildoers from peeking at the remains of the great Yao and the remnants of its true blood, the successive white emperors had never built a tomb in the mountains. They would only wait until the end of their lifespans before they would follow the secret path that Qin Changxing had taken and arrive in the mountains. They would randomly choose a place to close their eyes and return their souls to the sea of stars. Of course, other than when they were on the verge of death, the successive white emperors would often come to the Starfall Mountains to pay their respects to their ancestors, to enjoy the scenery, or to search for opportunities to break into the next realm. Naturally, it was unavoidable that they would build buildings for resting in these snowy peaks. It was just that these buildings were surrounded by extremely powerful seals, making it extremely difficult for anyone other than the White Emperor to enter. The current White Emperor and the Demon Lord engaged in a heaven-shaking battle on the snowy plains to the north of Mount Han. The Demon Lord was heavily injured, and then Black Robe and the Demon Commander worked together to overthrow him. The White Emperor's injuries were also extremely severe. In the last few years, he had secluded himself in the Starfall Mountains. Other than Madame Mu and the Xiong clan leader, very few people knew where he was. Qin Changxing had the map provided by the Shi clan leader, so he naturally did not lose his way. Using the yesher, step to tread on the snow, he quickly found the place. In front of two extremely verdant and ancient pines was a large black cliff. The cliff was covered in ice and snow that had not melted for tens of thousands of years. It looked extremely cold and lifeless, with nothing out of the ordinary about it. The area indicated on the map was very vast. Chun Chongqing did not know where the entrance was, so he could only spread his spiritual sense in all directions. However, he discovered that a barrier had appeared in front of him. This barrier was like a cushion of air, cutting off his spiritual sense, but it actually calmed his mind because he had confirmed that this was the place. Hidden beneath the black cliff and the frigid ice and snow was an array. After sensing it for a few moments, he discovered the formidable aspects of this array. This array probably originated from the same source as the Tang Palace array in the capital's imperial palace. It was both strict and dangerous, and contained its own mysteries between life and death. However, perhaps because it had absorbed too much qi from the snowy peaks and cold lakes, this array was even colder and more callous than the Tang Palace. It faintly exuded a somber aura, but also an extremely powerful qi of the imperial clan. If this array was activated, it would probably be no less powerful than the seal of the Red River. Of course, compared to the imperial design of the capital, it was still much weaker. 2 days ago, when Qin Chongqing broke the seal of the Red River, he had consumed too much of the light energy in the divine staff of the orthodoxy and could not use it again. So what method could he use to break the array? Since there were arrays in the world, there was naturally a corresponding method to break them. Chen Changsheng was well versed in the Taoist canon, and after cultivating he had also studied arrays, but he was still not skilled in this Tao. After studying it for a very long time, he could only think of one possibility. As he gazed at the black cliff of ice, he once more felt that strange feeling in his heart. If he had not mistaken her for an elf girl, would they have been together even earlier? If on that day on the banks of the Tang River he had patiently waited for half a day after reading the letter, would she have come with him on a crane? If she were here, would she be able to see the flaw in this array with just a glance? With a clang, several dozen swords appeared in the sky. An incomparably awe-inspiring sword intent spread out in all directions from Chun Chongqing's body, instantly chopping apart the countless snowflakes drifting down. Chun Chongqing gripped the stainless sword and warily gazed at a protrusion at the very bottom of the black cliff. The snowflakes drifting down came from the ice and snow above the black cliff. This was because the cliff had been shaken as clearly as his feet could feel. The protrusion at the bottom of the black cliff suddenly split open, and 2 people climbed out. The several dozen swords trembled and let out a frightening hum, but they did not attack because Chen Chongqing recognized the identities of these 2 people. These 2 people were Jin Yilu and Xiao Da. Jin Yilu had once been the gatekeeper of the Orthodox Academy and had helped Qin Chongsheng resolve many problems. Although they had not met for many years, their friendship still existed. Although Xiao Da and Qin Chongsheng were enemies, he had always had a close relationship with the human race. In the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, he and Xiaozhang had forced their way into the imperial palace and helped the Tang second master seize control of the imperial design. One could imagine that he had been Shang Xingzhou's collaborator at the time. The resolute attitude the Shi clan leader had displayed in the heavenly selection ceremony and in the following 2 days also proved this point. Chun Chongqing naturally would not attack them, but he had not expected them to emerge from the black cliff. If the White Emperor really was in secluded cultivation in the depths of the cliff, had they seen him? At this moment, not even he knew which answer he wanted to hear, because none of them seemed good. To be continued. Chapter 178. Jin Yilu was still wearing that embroidered robe, covered in copper coins, looking like a wealthy man. However, he was now in a rather sorry state, his body covered in mud and stone fragments. Xiaoda's appearance was even worse. His clothes were covered in yellow mud, a color even deeper than the ruthless yellow in his eyes, more like some sort of filth. Seeing Chun Chongqing standing outside the cliff, Jinyu Lu was very shocked, but soon after, a gratified expression appeared on his face. He did not need to think to know that Chen Chongqing had appeared because of Luo Luo. Xiao De looked at Chen Chongqing with a somewhat complicated gaze. In the last few years, he had often unconsciously acted in accordance with Chen Chongqing's style. In other words, he was learning from the opponent he had once hated the most. Now that he had suddenly met him, someone as proud as him could not help but feel somewhat awkward. Jinyu Lu asked, "Your Holiness, the Pope has also come to see His Majesty?" Chen Chongqing nodded and asked, "Did you see him?" Jinyu Lu shook his head, seeming particularly tired. "I knew it was inside, but I couldn't get in no matter what." Chen Chongqing was quiet for a while, then asked, "Is the sage well?" Jinyu Lu replied, "I haven't seen him, so I don't know." A wary expression appeared on Xiao De's face. Chen Chongqing said to him, "The Shi clan leader told me of this position." Xiao De understood the hidden meaning in these words and said, "Then it's up to you now." The Shi clan leader had always been renowned for his intelligence and caution. If he were not certain that Xiao De could not succeed, he would never have told Chen Chongqing the location of the White Emperor's seclusion. Chen Chongqing gazed at the black cliff, sensing the power of the sealing array, and slightly arched his brows. If he wanted to resolve all the problems at hand, he first had to determine the situation within the black cliff. This was what Chen Chongqing thought. This was what the Shi clan leader thought. Xiao De also thought, so he withdrew from the heavenly selection ceremony that he had planned for so many years, came to the black cliff, and began to dig a hole. Jinyu Lu also thought this way. He had come earlier than Xiao De and dug even faster. By now, Xiao De had been digging for 2 days and 2 nights without rest, while Jinyu Lu had been digging for 4 days and 4 nights. Chen Chongqing had been prepared to use the method of forcefully breaking through the cliff to get past the seal. This method of relying purely on strength seemed crude, even idiotic, but it was often the correct choice. Experts like Xiao De and Jinyu Lu naturally understood this principle. Unfortunately, they still failed. There was no need for Chen Chongqing to try again, but he wanted to go in and take a look. The entrance to the cave was on the surface of the black cliff, but it wasn't straight. Instead, it slanted upwards until it reached the deepest part of the cliff. Chen Chongqing followed Jinyu Lu and Xiao De for a very long time before reaching the end. Looking at the clear and deep claw marks on the cave walls, feeling the remaining violent aura, he seemed to see what had really happened in the past few days. Jinyu Lu and Xiao De had entered a berserk state, their mountainous bodies madly attacking the hard cliff. Occasionally, the silhouettes of massive lions and leopards would appear in the dark cave. Soon he noticed something strange about the cave walls. The stone wall in front of him was very smooth, like a piece of jade. There were no cracks, not even dirt. Jinyu Lu said, "We've tried changing directions several times, but we couldn't get around the stone wall. This means that this place is the living pivot of the formation." Chen Chongqing asked, "What is this stone wall itself?" Jinyu Lu replied, "It should be the legendary star stone. It has a weight countless times greater than its volume. Even an expert of the divine domain would find it very difficult to move." Hearing the name Starstone, Chen Chongqing recalled the treasure of the orthodoxy that Taoist Baisher had once held. After a moment of silence, he stepped forward and fiercely slashed at the stone wall with the stainless sword. There was a clang. The stainless sword was as bright and sharp as ever, undamaged, but it had only left behind a very faint mark on the stone wall. If he wanted to use the stainless sword to cut through this stone wall, he would have to spend many days. Chen Chongqing was somewhat disappointed, but he didn't know that Jinyu Lu and Xiao De were both shocked by the sight. Besides its unimaginable density and weight, Starstone was also famous for its toughness. Jinyu Lu and Xiao De had tried many times, but whether it was the claws of their true form in the berserk state or the high-level magical artifacts they carried with them, none of them could leave a single mark on the surface of Starstone. A casual swing of Chen Chongqing's sword had managed to cut a small hole in the stone wall. Just how sharp was this sword? Xiao De had clashed with Chun Changsheng's sword in the alley of the Northern Military Department. At the time, he had not felt that Chun Changsheng's sword was this frightening, but he soon realized that this was probably because Chun Changsheng's cultivation in the path of the sword had greatly increased in the last few years. Chun Changsheng asked, since it's a sealing array, someone should have laid it down. Who could place such a heavy stone wall in the position of the living pivot of heavenly secrets? Jin Yulu replied, it was probably the Empress who used the power of the tides to push the starstone to seal this place. Xiao De suddenly said, starstones can absorb star radiance. Chen Changsheng was somewhat confused as to why he had suddenly said this, but he soon understood, and his expression turned rather grave. Star radiance was not starlight, but an invisible energy extracted from the swaying of the invisible line between the distant star and the cultivator. The true essence in the body of a cultivator was also star radiance, and not even a saint could escape this category. If this stone wall could endlessly absorb star radiance, it also meant that it could absorb the White Emperor's true essence. Even if the White Emperor had an unfathomable cultivation and did not care about the interference of the starstone, he was still quietly recuperating in the depths of the black cliff. Why would he add more trouble to Chun Changsheng's troubles? All these clues ultimately pointed to one possibility. Whether it's the heavenly selection ceremony or the alliance with the demons, it turns out that it has nothing to do with us demi-humans, but the ambitions of the great Western continent. If His Majesty has already returned to the Sea of Stars. In a very short time, Jin Yulu had aged a great deal, his voice beginning to tremble. This was not a very likely possibility. When an expert of the divine domain returned to the Sea of Stars, the entire continent would sense it. This was a heavenly omen. When the blue-clothed visitor had just died, Madame Mu, who was 80,000 li away, had learned of the news. When plotting against Biyanghong and Wuqiongbai, Madame Mu had first activated the seal of the Red River for this very reason, and the White Emperor was a saint of this generation. If he really did return to the Sea of Stars, no matter how powerful the seal was, it would not be able to block the news, and the world would assuredly quake. Xiao De solemnly said, even if His Majesty is fine, the situation is still very dangerous. In the battle with the Demon Lord, His Majesty suffered extremely heavy injuries, and now that the Empress has used this method, not only has His Majesty's injuries not improved, they are only worsening by the day. If a few more days pass, the worst might really occur. When they thought of this possibility, Jin Yulu and Xiao De both grimaced, but Chun Changsheng was much calmer. Just as he had thought before entering the Black Cliff, the White Emperor's death or survival was extremely bad news for the human race. If it was the former, it meant that there was no one in the demi-human race that could suppress Madame Mu's ambitions. If it was the latter, it meant that the White Emperor truly did share Madame Mu's thoughts, that he wanted to ally with the demons. With a saint like this watching from the shadows, what else could he do? Now he speculated that the White Emperor was heavily injured, imprisoned, and weakened by Madame Mu's methods. This situation was actually the best. This meant that the Xiong clan leader had been pretending to have the White Emperor's decree that night. In reality, the White Emperor still supported the human race. In that case, as long as he was rescued, everything would be easily solved. At this moment, an extremely bright and clear cry of a crane came from outside the cave. Chun Changsheng emerged from the cave, took down the paper and read it, his expression turning extremely solemn. The white crane had brought two pieces of news. One was good news, one was bad news. Xian Yuan had awakened, while Biyanghong had fallen unconscious. To be continued. Chapter 179. After receiving the letter, Chun Changsheng said a few words to Jin Yulu and Xiao De before riding off on the crane. Jin Yulu and Xiao De glanced at each other, seeing the doubt and unease in each other's eyes. Before Chun Changsheng left, he said that he was going to take care of something and that he would return once he was done. In the end, he said that he hoped that the matter would not be finished. These words were very strange and incomprehensible. Just what sort of matter was it that was more important than helping the White Emperor escape? On a snowy peak 10 li away from the Black Cliff, the drifting snow and white clothes seemed to fuse together. Su Yurong had already been standing here for some time. She had watched Qin Changsheng, Jin Yulu, and Xiao to enter the Black Cliff, watched the White Crane arrive, and then Qin Changsheng leave. She had vaguely guessed at what had happened in White Emperor City, and her mood had also been somewhat affected. She had already observed the sealing array of the Black Cliff for a long enough time to find a way to break it. She took out a white paper from her sleeve and folded it into a crane, then let it go. The paper crane flew with the wind, drifting to the Black Cliff and then landing on the ground. Xiao warily looked around, but found nothing. He picked up the paper crane and opened it. He saw 2 words written on the paper, the handwriting graceful and probably written by a woman. The 2 words were, "Sword Array." With Su Yurong's speed, it took only a very short amount of time to return from the Starfall Mountains to White Emperor City. She did not go to the small courtyard behind the temple to the Celestial Tree because she still did not want to meet with Qin Changsheng, and also because she subconsciously did not want to see those scenes. When she returned to the inn from yesterday, she did not return to her room. Instead, she went to the front hall and ordered the inn's most famous jitong buns. The atmosphere in White Emperor City was tense and strange. There were not many pedestrians on the streets, so the inn's business was naturally poor. Very few people had the leisure to come here for breakfast. The diners who still wanted to eat at a time like this were assuredly the truly lively idlers, and lively idlers were naturally good at gossiping. As Su Yurong ate her beef and egg porridge and her buns, she listened in on the gossip of the guests at the neighboring tables. Recently, the greatest excitement in White Emperor City had naturally been the heavenly selection ceremony and the successive appearances of the Demon Lord and Qin Changsheng. As for the most heated gossip, it was naturally the words that Xian Yuan had shouted in front of the imperial city. It was also the words that Princess Luo Luo had personally admitted. She did not know what the Pope was thinking, but seeing that he did not care about the long journey, rode a crane, and said those words, he should like Her Highness, right? I heard that the human race is very afraid of this kind of thing. But when did our demon race care about this? If you like it, then let's sleep together. I've heard that His Holiness the Pope and the Holy Maiden are engaged. But when has our demi-human race ever cared about such things? They could just snatch it. If they really couldn't snatch it, they could sleep together. Su Yurong's mood was originally a little down. She had heard a stomach full of gossip during the meal, so she wasn't full at all, which made her mood even worse. The so-called brightly lit Tao heart that was calm like water had long since been forgotten by her. She took a steamed bun and a plate of vinegar garlic and returned to her room. She simply washed up and sat in front of the table. Looking at herself in the bronze mirror, she began to be lost in thought. The reflection in the mirror was not very clear, rather blurry, but the face in the mirror was still beautiful, like the most beautiful flower the world could imagine. I'm her teacher. If I say she can't marry, she can't marry. It was truly a domineering statement. What a good relationship between teacher and student, she thought mockingly. She was keenly aware that to Qin Changsheng, the little black dragon represented a favor that he would definitely repay for the rest of his life. The truly troublesome one was still Luo Luo. No matter how one looked at it, Luo Luo was the type of girl that men most liked, not to mention that her love for Qin Changsheng was so clean and undemanding. She could not do this, could not love Qin Changsheng more than herself. She couldn't even understand how someone could do it. She only knew that if she wanted to walk the long 1,000 years of cultivation with Qin Changsheng, she would have to face the greatest challenge. The more she thought about it, the more unhappy she became. She pouted, revealing the attitude of a little girl that she had never seen in the outside world. She looked at herself in the mirror and snorted, "You're so beautiful. You're the most beautiful girl in the world. It's not like he's blind." After saying this, she suddenly came to her senses. Feeling very ashamed, she let out a groan and covered her face. At this moment, a thin layer of mist suddenly appeared in the mirror. Su Yurong's expression froze, but she quickly regained her composure. There was no longer any anger or embarrassment in her eyes, only calm and beautiful. At this moment, she was the holy maiden, her temperament like a spring forest after a fresh rain. The mist in the mirror gradually changed, condensing into thick and thin lines. One could faintly make out the shape of a face. The image was still blurry, making it impossible to see the features, but for some reason, that face seemed incredibly handsome and exuded a temperament like that of a high mountain. Su Yurong looked at the man in the mirror and said, "I personally went to see the seal. Since the White Emperor is still alive, he should be able to come out. At the very least, he should be able to send a message." Hearing these words, the man in the mirror was silent for a long time. It was clear that these seemingly ordinary words had some impact on his mind. Su Yurong asked no questions, only quietly waited. The man sighed, indescribably sorrowful, even somewhat sorrowful. He said, "Since it's like this, let's help him come out." Su Yurong said, "I've already sent a message to Qin Changsheng. With his comprehension, he should be able to very quickly break the seal." The man said, "Since it's like this, all of you must be more cautious." Su Yurong suddenly asked, "Why is he willing to help you when you have no other methods? In the current situation, you have many opportunities to kill him." The man instead asked, "Then why are you willing to help me?" Su Yurong replied, "The greater picture is more important." The man calmly said, "It's the same principle. So he's not helping me, and I don't care about him. Killing him, there will be many more opportunities in the future." Su Yurong finally asked, "On Sir B's side, is there really no other method?" The man thought it over, then replied, "If not even that evil disciple can cure him, then there's nothing." The greater picture was naturally how the human race could continue to exist on this continent and multiply without end. Su Yurong had to consider this problem, the person in the copper mirror had to consider this problem, and Chen Changsheng, as the current pope of the human race, naturally had to consider this problem, even though he believed that he did not have the ability. There were many things that he did not have the ability to resolve. Even the medical path that he was most skilled in seemed to be completely useless at certain times. The white crane flew through the great trees of the celestial tree temple and landed in the ruined courtyard. Xianyuan Po's face was pale, and his right arm hung limply by his side. When he saw Chen Changsheng, he barely managed to squeeze out a smile. Qin Changsheng went up and hugged him. After patting him 3 times on the back, he said nothing more and walked into the room. Byung Hong leaned against the wall, his eyes closed, his expression normal, as if he was sleeping. Chen Changsheng silently walked up to him, took the needles from his finger, and began to treat him once more. It was said that his cinnabar pill could regrow bones and revive the dead, but that was actually just an exaggerated rumor. The cinnabar pill contained the blood of the sacred blood, could only treat external wounds like blood loss, broken bones, or ruptured abdomens. Byung Hong's injuries were caused by the 2 angels from the sacred light continent. His soul and body had suffered irreversible injuries that were simply impossible to treat. After some time, Qin Changsheng's Taoist robe was completely drenched in sweat. Fortunately, after the Tianhai Divine Empress had reconstructed his meridians, the strange fragrance that could drive the entire world mad was no longer present. Byung Hong slowly opened his eyes, finally waking up. Qin Changsheng once more saw that gloomy, gray-tinged qi in the depths of his eyes. This qi was extremely faint, like the fresh snow falling from a snowy plain, the raindrops falling from a mountain stream. If one did not possess an extremely powerful spiritual sense like his, they would have found it utterly impossible to notice. This qi was the will of death. To be continued. Chapter 180. 2 days had passed, and Madame Mu had probably already discovered from certain details that Bian Hong and Wu Qiongbai were still alive and in this small courtyard. But presumably, she would not act against Bian Hong and Wu Qiongbai because Chen Chongqing was already here and the rift within the demi-human race was already extremely deep. Only if she truly began to go crazy and no longer cared that the demi-human race would be burned to ashes in the flames of civil war. The wind from the river rustled the leaves in the temple of the celestial tree, which then fell into the quiet courtyard. The rustling was very clear. Such a quiet moment was extremely suitable for chatting or handing over a few things, especially at this moment when Bian Hong had used some method to make Wu Qiongbai fall asleep. Chen Chongqing asked, "What does Senior wish to leave behind? Or what do you want us to do?" Bian Hong replied, "In the past, I believed that I would leave behind a descendant, but since there is none now, there is no need to say anything." When he said this, his expression was very calm, and his tone was also very indifferent, but anyone could hear the deep pain hidden in it. An expert of the continent, on his deathbed with no one to send him off, to see his son die early, anyone would find it very difficult to accept. Chen Chongqing said, "It is also good to leave behind some of Senior's thoughts for the common people." Many people knew that Bian Hong was a scholar from Shiling's 10,000 Years Pavilion, but his life experiences and cultivation had always been a mystery. Just what aspect of my past does the common people want to know the most? Bian Hong glanced at Wu Qiongbai and sighed, "It's probably why you married her." Chen Chongqing thought this over, then very honestly said, "There truly are many people who don't understand. Although no one has ever dared to mention this matter to us husband and wife, I know that this sort of gossip has always existed in many taverns and inns. There have even been some storytellers who helped us think of many bizarre stories, imagined many scenarios for me. The bee in those stories truly suffered an extremely tragic fate, and even I felt very sympathetic when I heard it." Bian Hong smiled and continued, "It's all fake. There are so many things in life that have no choice, much less someone like me." Chen Chongsheng thought to himself that this was indeed the case. An expert of the divine domain possessed unimaginable power and authority, not much different from an emperor. How could they possibly endure for so many years because they had no other choice? Bian Hong explained, "This story is really much simpler than all of you think. When I was young, my family was poor. My master took me in and raised me. I grew up together with my junior sister. She respected and loved me, never doing anything that made me unhappy. I naturally also loved and pitied her. When I was a little older, I naturally married her." Chen Chongqing didn't expect the story to be so simple. Bian Hong added, "Although she truly was not like this when I married her, if I think about it carefully, isn't this also my fault?" Chen Chongqing said, "If this is true, then Senior's arrogance towards her is indeed equivalent to indulging her in evil." Bian Hong replied, "So I'm not a gentleman, nor am I a good person." Chen Chongqing still couldn't accept it and said, "I still don't think this is right." Bian Hong looked at him and said, "If your wife treated you extremely well, but had an extremely bad personality and was even a great evil and wicked person, what would you do?" This question seemed very easy to answer, but it was extremely complicated upon further thought. Chen Chongsheng had never thought about such matters before, so he naturally didn't know the answer. Wu Qiongbai happened to wake up at this moment. When she heard these words, she naturally believed that Bian Hong was talking about her. She instantly became angry and cursed. "I just killed a few pieces of trash that disrespected their elders. But do you think I'm a great evil and wicked person? You heartless thing." The silence in the courtyard was instantly shattered, everything seeming to be thrown into disarray. Bian Hong did not explain. He looked at her and said with extreme seriousness and gentleness, "In the future, don't do this sort of thing, all right?" Just like the day before yesterday, Wu Qiongbai once more panicked. She mumbled, "Didn't I already promise you? Why keep bringing this up?" Byong-hong smiled at her and said, "Junior sister, I'm very sorry that I can no longer accompany you." Wu Qiongbai became even more panicked. She grabbed his clothes and shrieked, "What nonsense are you saying?" Byong-hong sighed and said, "I'm not speaking nonsense." Wu Qiongbai's face paled. Her nervousness made her tongue-tied, her words somewhat stuttering. "But you still can't speak nonsense." Byong-hong replied, "I'm not speaking nonsense." Wu Qiongbai yelled in absolute terror, "I forbid you from leaving, or else I'll cut off Guanbai's hand as well. Or else I'll throw myself in with the demons. I once thought of asking His Holiness to take me away and only leave you with the letter of divorce. But I know that you've definitely guessed that I'm dead, so it's better to just say it." Byong-hong tenderly caressed her face and said, "Because you know that I won't abandon you." Xian Yuan stood by the door, constantly wiping his tears with his sleeve, but he couldn't wipe them clean. He didn't really understand these things, but he felt that his senior's words were rather heart-wrenching. "Can I trouble you to buy a few steamed buns?" Byong-hong somewhat embarrassedly said to him, "I want to eat the beef and onion filling." Startled, Xian Yuan hurriedly ran out of the small courtyard, completely disregarding the fact that he had only just recovered from his heavy injuries and was still incredibly weak. In the morning mist and steam, he ran back to the Huji bun store, brimming with regret. He thought, "Why didn't I see that Senior wanted to eat beef buns a few days ago?" Xian Yuan carried a tray of steamed buns back to the small courtyard, escorted by tensome priests and experts of the bear tribe. The tray of steamed buns was still scalding hot. If one tore off the soft skin, one could smell the aroma of beef, onion, and chili oil. Alas, it was a little too late. Byong-hong's eyes were closed, no longer breathing. Xian Yuan froze. The steam from the steamer in his bosom drifted up into the gloomy sky, also falling on his face. It was somewhat hot, somewhat wet. Chen Chongsheng silently lowered his head, his fingers trembling at his side, the sword in his sheath vibrating with them. Xian Yuan kneeled in front of Byong-hong, placed the tray of steamed buns in front of him, and then respectfully kowtowed several times, tears streaming down his face. Wu Qiongbai noticed nothing. She stared in a daze at Byong-hong, her eyes gradually growing lax and her body swaying. Dang, 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 dang. A bell rang out from the celestial tree temple. Wu Qiongbai came to her senses, her eyes reddening and her lips trembling. She finally understood what had happened. A mournful sob resounded from the small courtyard. Chun Chongsheng walked out of the courtyard. As he listened to the bell from the celestial tree temple, he recalled the night before Archbishop Mei Lisha died. On that night, the capital had also heard the sound of a bell. Was the bell really the signal to return home? Was the Sea of Stars really the homeland of all souls? Whether noble or lowly, beautiful or ugly. Just like a sob, no matter how unpleasant it was to hear, was it still so sorrowful? It's been a long time since I've chatted. Today I thought about it again. I actually have many things I want to say to everyone, but I decided not to. Reading is fine. I wish everyone well. To be continued. Chapter 181. After Byong-hong's death, Wu Qiongbai became somewhat foolish. Her hair was disheveled as she sat against the wall, hugging Byong-hong's body to her chest. She forbade anyone from approaching, much less moving. Chen Chongsheng and Xian Yuan stood at the door, watching this sight, not knowing what to do. Byong-hong and Wu Qiongbai were both experts of the divine domain. They could be considered the most famous couple on the continent. The entire continent knew that this couple had a very good relationship, but the entire continent did not understand why. More accurately, the entire continent did not understand why Byong-hong treated Wu Qiongbai so well. The Tianhai Divine Empress had not understood, nor had Wang Pa. Because they could not understand, they and the rest of the world felt injustice for Byong-hong. Before his death, Byong-hong had told Chen Chongsheng a very simple story, but Qin Chongqing still found it impossible to understand. He knew what sort of feeling it was to like someone. He deeply liked Su Yorong, but whether it was in the garden of Zhou, in the snowstorm on the bridge of helplessness, or in the twilight of Holy Maiden Peak, he had already liked Su Yorong to the point where his heart could not let go of any other scenery, but he still found it impossible to understand this matter. If your wife treated you extremely well, but had an extremely bad personality and was even a great villain, what would you do? He recalled Biang Hong's question. If Su Yorong was a great villain, what would he do? He did not know. He looked into the room. Wu Qiangbai's hair was scattered over her body, her black hair already graying. Her expression was one of utter defeat and despair. Qin Chongqing felt both pity and discomfort at this sight. In short, his emotions were rather complex. Xian Yuan Po was a very simple person, not one to think about complicated matters. When Wu Qianbai wanted to destroy the Orthodox Academy, he had been the person closest to death. He naturally did not like this Taoist nun. He had only known Biang Hong for a very short time, but he deeply admired him and wanted to get close to him, to treat him as his master. But this would not change his attitude toward Wu Qianbai. On the contrary, he loathed her even more, especially after seeing that quarrel. The more he liked Biang Hong, the more he loathed Wu Qianbai. The more beautiful, the uglier. As expected, positions were relative. All things in the world and emotions were relative. Wu Qianbai raised her head to look at Xian Yuan Po. Seeing the emotions in his eyes, she asked, "Do you hate me?" Xian Yuan Po was silent for a while before saying, "Yes, because I don't understand why you're still alive and he's dead. It's not fair." Wu Qianbai indifferently said, "Good people don't live long while scourges live for 1,000 years. Don't you know this principle?" Xian Yuan Po didn't know how to respond to this and felt even more depressed. Qin Chongqing shook his head. A hint of ridicule flashed across Wu Qiangbai's face. "Don't you want to know why he treats me so well?" Xian Yuan Po's gaze moved from the steaming bun to Biang Hong's face. As he thought about how he could snatch Senior's body from this madman's hands, he completely ignored her. Qin Chongqing also said nothing. Wu Qianbai sneered, "This is an extremely old story. If you don't ask me, I don't have the energy to recall it. Mr. B has already told us when you were asleep just now." Qin Chongqing paused, then continued, "If you want to add something, please go ahead." "He was saved by my father from the 100-seed store. At the time he was as thin as a monkey, too hungry, and his throat had been injured by an old beggar. I brought out my favorite soup dumplings, but he couldn't eat them. Even now, I can't forget that greedy and pained appearance. In the end, I tore up the entire tray of buns, gathered the gravy inside into a small bowl, and slowly fed it to him. Only then did I manage to save his life." Wu Qiangbai's expression became rather desolate as she said, "Later on, he told me that he had sworn to that bowl of meat juice that he would treat me well for the rest of his life. No matter what I did, he would not blame me, and no matter what danger he encountered, he would protect me." Qin Chongqing was quiet for a while, then said, "I think he did it." "Correct, he truly did it. My treatment of him was not even 1% of what he gave me back. I knew that no one liked me, and I knew that he would even take the blame on himself. He would say that he had been stationed in Blue Pass Incognito for more than 70 years and rarely returned home. He didn't get to see my father one last time, and when I had a miscarriage, he didn't come to take care of me. That's why my personality changed so much." Wu Qiangbai's voice was suddenly tinged with resentment. "But so what? He said that he would accompany me for the rest of my life. But now he's still leaving early." Xian Yuan Po did not understand. "Senior is dead, but he didn't abandon you. Do I have to be blamed for this?" Qin Chongqing understood and said, "But before he left, he was still worried about you. So he said those words, telling me to change, telling me to listen to you." Wu Qiangbei sneered at him. "Did you really think that I would be moved by these past events and suddenly repent? Xian Yuanpa was furious at these words, while Qin Chongqing was also speechless. He could no longer understand what this Taoist nun wanted. Wu Qiong straightened Bianghong, took a bun from the steamer, and began to eat. There was a lot of red oil in the beef and onion bun. Although it was no longer scalding hot, it had not congealed. 2 streams of red oil flowed down the corners of her lips, looking like blood. It was somewhat comical, somewhat disgusting, somewhat terrifying. Wu Qiong lowered her head. Neither Qin Chongqing nor Xian Yuanpa saw that her eyes were gradually suffused with ruthlessness. Qin Chongqing was still thinking about the things she had just said. Those things that Bianghong owed her and his family were probably true. But why had Bianghong not said them? He quickly understood the reason and meaning behind them, and couldn't help but feel somewhat perplexed. Wu Qiong believed that Bianghong would say those things to show that he truly did owe her and his family, so that the world would be more lenient toward her. But she did not understand that if Bianghong really did this, the world would only have an even worse impression of her. Whether it was the favor of saving her life at the very beginning or the events that followed, they would all make people feel that she was trying to force him to repay her. Bianghong's method was even better. He did not talk about these things, only told an extremely simple story. He liked her. She was his wife, so he should protect her. This way, when he left this world, she could still receive some respect as his wife, and her days would presumably be a little better. Death was imminent, but in his final moments, Bianghong was still thinking about how to make her days a little better, and he had done many things for her sake. This was naturally the feeling that left Qin Chongqing somewhat perplexed. He vaguely understood that the relationship between Bianghong and Wu Qiongbai was related to that question. She liked him, she treated him well, and he also liked her. At least, he used to like her, so what could he do? Place righteousness before family? Su Li had not killed the demon princess. So what could Bianghong do to Wu Qiongbai? Even if the entire world was about to be destroyed, what could he do? To be continued. Chapter 182. After finishing her bun, Wu Qiongbai raised her head to Qin Chongqing and Xian Yuanpa and said, "All of you say that I'm a bad person, so I'll continue to be a bad person. What can you do to me?" As she said this, her face was expressionless, but her eyes were filled with derision and contempt. Xian Yuanpa was silent, as was Qin Chongqing. Wu Qiongbai suddenly grew angry and harshly yelled, "Aren't you afraid that after I recover, I'll cut off Guanbai's arm as well?" Qin Chongqing remained silent, but Xian Yuanpa incredulously asked, "How can you be so bad?" Wu Qiongbai was very satisfied with his reaction. "No matter how bad I am, he still likes me. Is that not enough?" After saying this, she gave a pleased smile. Her beautiful face was deathly pale. The red oil smeared on it like blood. It was an abnormally cruel and terrifying sight. Qin Chongqing stared into her eyes and vaguely guessed at what she wanted to do. Suddenly feeling very depressed, he got up and walked out of the room. Wu Qiongbay's face revealed a hint of shock as she watched him leave. She yelled, "Why are you leaving?" Xian Yuanpa saw the red oil dripping from the corner of her mouth as she spoke and felt rather annoyed. He turned around and handed 2 sheets of paper to her. Wu Qiongbai did not take the paper, but stared into his eyes and asked, "All the beef buns have this much oil?" Both the question itself and her current expression seemed rather neurotic. Xian Yuanpa thought about how wretched she truly was and suppressed his emotions. "That's butter mixed with chili. Only like that can it be fragrant. You clearly know that beef buns are fragrant, so why did you only let us eat steamed buns?" Wu Qiongbay's voice suddenly became shrill as if she had gone mad. She began to wail at Xian Yuanpa. "He's about to die, so what does it matter if you let him eat some beef buns?" Xian Yuanpa said nothing. It wasn't that he thought she was crazy, but that he also deeply regretted this matter. In the last few days, he had bought plain steamed buns for Bianghong and Wu Qiongbai while he ate beef buns. It wasn't that he couldn't afford them, but that they were heavily injured and should eat lightly. But Byung-hong had still died. Since that was the case, why not happily eat a few beef buns? Wu Qiong suddenly calmed down and expressionlessly said, "Die!" There was a soft clap. Wu Qiong raised her left hand and thrust her index finger at Xian Yuanpe. Her broken arm was severely injured and she was extremely weak. Although Xian Yuanpe was also injured, he could at least move freely. Logically speaking, he should be able to avoid this finger attack. However, this finger seemed to have some kind of magical power. It completely ignored Xian Yuanpe's subconscious reaction, and just like that, it landed between his eyebrows with incomparable precision. Wu Qiong's finger seemed to have exhausted all her strength. Her face grew even paler, even faintly translucent. Xian Yuanpe let out a low howl of pain. His body trembled violently, and his body enlarged rapidly. His clothes were torn apart, and clumps of black hair poked out from the cracks. He was instantly forced into a berserk state by Wu Qiong's finger, but he was still unable to escape Wu Qiong's fingers, unable to even make a simple movement like shaking his head. That finger was still quietly resting between his eyebrows, as if it was stuck there. Xian Yuanpe had always been tall and sturdy, and after his berserk state, he was like a small mountain. His eyebrows could not be separated from Wu Qiong's finger, so he could no longer maintain his previous posture and fell forward. But he did not fall to the ground. On the contrary, he floated up, looking like a leather bag filled with steam. Wu Qiong's finger seemed to be pulling on the string of this leather bag. Qin Changxing heard the ruckus and rushed back into the room, where he saw this strange sight. Wu Qiong's finger naturally made him recall Byung-hong's finger from yesterday. Byung-hong had used that finger to pour the experience of the battle between the divine and a great deal of cultivation knowledge into a sea of consciousness. Wu Qiong seemed to be doing the same thing, but there was also a clear difference. He could sense the majestic pressure of the divine, as well as the abnormally terrifying surges of true essence. A cold wind howled through the room, ruffling Byung-hong's clothes and sweeping up the dregs of crystals and the fragments of the wooden pagoda on the floor. It circled around Wu Qiong and Xian Yuanpe's bodies. In an extremely short amount of time, Wu Qiong had grown thinner, aged several hundred years. Traces of frost could faintly be seen in her hair, and her face was even paler and thinner, so translucent that one could almost see her muscles and bones. In truth, it was impossible to see that all that could be seen was pure and divine light. Her eyes became fervent, brimming with madness. She stared at Xian Yuanpe and harshly shouted, "If your luck is bad, then just die." With this shout, the pure and divine light pierced through her skin, transforming into countless golden shards that entered Xian Yuanpe's body. Xian Yuanpe's body began to tremble once more. His withered right arm was constantly broken and then repaired, giving off an unbearable snapping sound. His expression was one of extreme agony. Qin Changxing sensed extreme danger, but in this situation, he did not dare to do anything. He could only nervously wait. After some time, Wu Qiong drew back her finger. Xian Yuanpe fell heavily onto the ground, creating several deep gashes. Countless amounts of blood splashed out, and then he fainted just like that. Qin Changxing rushed over to examine his injuries and angrily yelled at Wu Qiong, "Have you gone mad?" He didn't know what she had passed on to Xian Yuanpe, but it was clearly countless times more dangerous than Byung-hong's methods from yesterday. In other words, when she said that she wanted Xian Yuanpe to die, she really had not been lying. Qin Changxing was even more clear that her words just now had been meant to anger him so that he would kill her. For example, she had taunted him about suddenly repenting, or she had said that she would cut off Guan Bai's remaining arm. She truly had gone mad, but even if she wanted to die, why had she used such a method? Wu Qiong sat against the wall in a daze. Suddenly, she wretchedly yelled, "He's gone, and I don't want to live anymore, but I'm afraid of death. I really am afraid of death." Then she struggled to turn her head and look at the already lifeless Byung-hong. With a trembling voice, she said, "But I still want to be together with you." After saying this, she began to cry. She cried for a very long time, until her tears turned into sobs, and ultimately there was no more sound. Chun Changxing's body was somewhat stiff as he placed a finger under her nose. Wu Qiangbai's eyes were closed, leaning against her man. She was already dead. Chun Changxing drew back his finger and looked outside the courtyard. The courtyard was extremely quiet. He suddenly felt rather helpless. To be continued. Chapter 183. Bianhong was dead, and Wu Qianbai was also dead. They had died in White Emperor City, 80,000 li from their homeland. Their souls would return to the Sea of Stars, not to Shiling's 10,000 years pavilion, so it did not matter where they were buried. There was an extremely deep fissure in the small courtyard, probably created when Chisu emerged from underground. As the Yin winds of the earth river repaired itself, the fissure had already been filled with rock, leaving only a hole about 2 feet deep. Chun Changsheng placed Bianhong's and Wu Qiangbai's bodies in the pit. Before he could push the earth back, a cool breeze blew through the trees of the celestial tree temple, leaving only 2 patches of golden sand in the pit. When Zhu Luo died, he had seen a similar sight. He knew that this was a sign unique to experts of the divine domain, so he was not surprised, but the golden sand in the earth made him think of another matter. Even now, many people believe that the Tianhai Divine Empress had been buried in the deepest part of the Orthodox Academy, but in reality, it was in the 100 Herb Garden. He was somewhat confused as to why, after the Tianhai Divine Empress's death, her body had not transformed into the purest golden sand like the other experts of the divine domain, but had remained in its original state. Was this the difference between the concealed divinity realm and the saint realm? He did not think any further. With a wave of his sleeve, he jolted the white stones in the courtyard into the pit. Watching the golden gravel gradually disappear, he silently thought of a few names in his heart. Chusu, Madame Mu, Black Robe, the Sacred Light Continent. The entire continent had sensed the deaths of 2 experts of the divine domain. The laws of the world resonated, the omens gradually appearing. In the distant cloud grave in the east, many whirlpools appeared, and the stream flowing through that solitary peak suddenly increased in speed. A one-horned beast, drinking water by the stream, raised its head and gazed into the distance, a hint of loneliness appearing in its pure and holy eyes. The red river no longer had any waves. It was as calm as a mirror, making it seem extremely strange. From the depths of the river came the low hum of the jing, as if it was mourning something. The Archbishop of the Western Wastes, who knew the secret behind this matter, looked at the gloomy rain clouds over the small courtyard with a sorrowful expression. 2 rainbows appeared behind the rain clouds, stretching out from White Emperor City, crossing the wide river and reaching into the distant mountains, perhaps even farther. Only now did the Prime Minister of the Yao race, the Bear race patriarch, and the Sure race patriarch know what had happened. They were so shocked that they didn't know what to say. The priests and cultivators outside the alley, as well as the greater number of demon warriors, sensed the meaning of the 2 rainbows and dropped to their knees. The believers of the orthodoxy in the crowd began to recite the Taoist scriptures under the lead of the Archbishop, piously and reverently. Chun Changsheng did not return to the Taoist church of the Western Wilderness, but remained in the small courtyard. This was because Xian Yuan had yet to awaken, and he had some matters to think about. The Prime Minister of the Yao race, the Sure clan's clan leader, and other important figures all came over. They wanted to know the details of this matter, and more importantly, they wanted to know his attitude. But he did not see them. The small courtyard once again became incomparably quiet. He sat on the edge of the wooden platform outside the house. His gaze fell from the lifeless short pine tree to the white stones and then to the gray wall, unable to be sure. He suddenly felt rather tired and lost interest in many things. Just like right now, he clearly knew that the entire demi-human race was warily and uneasily waiting for his response. but he did not want to pay them any attention. Just like many people, he very much liked and respected Byung-hong, but he was truly not familiar with him. Logically speaking, he should not have been so agitated, but in reality his mind had been dealt a massive blow. Good people were not necessarily rewarded, and it was not even easy to live. So why must we be good people? How should we live? Why should we live? He gazed up at the night sky, thinking about this question that was often mocked by others, but in reality, everyone should carefully ponder. Tonight, there were no clouds or fog in White Emperor City, so one could see very clearly. One could see very far away, could see many stars. Chun Chong-shung's spirit left his body and floated towards the sea of stars. It passed through the star that was sputtering starlight, passed through the star that had countless spiral arms, avoided the star that had a pair of bright wings, and continued forward until it passed through the invisible crystal wall and arrived at the outer sea of stars. The spiritual sense of a cultivator could only travel so far when they were fixing their fated star. Normally, when cultivating, they could only sense the existence of their fated star, but it was very difficult to reach it again. But this rule had no effect on Chun Chong-shung, just like how the invisible wall of crystal could not block off his spiritual sense. Perhaps it was because his spiritual sense had always been there. A red star quietly floated in the night sky, containing a passionate energy, yet its surface was calm, as if it would not change for millions upon millions of years. This was his fated star. Chun Chong-shung's spiritual sense did not fall on his fated star. This star was real, the one closest to him, but it was a place that he could never reach. Thus, this was the most false of truths, and it was easy to feel sad. He did not want to feel sad, so his spiritual sense continued forward, seeming rather cold. Ultimately, his spiritual sense arrived outside the sea of stars. On the other side, he could faintly make out many stars, like the lights of 10,000 households. Was the sacred light continent over there? He wanted to go over and take a look. At the age of 10, he learned that he was sick. From that moment on, the only thing he thought about was to continue living. On that rainy night, the Tianhai Divine Empress had reforged his meridians and broken the tribulation in his life. He could live past the age of 20, and he could still live for many more years. From that moment on, he very naturally began to ponder a few questions. Only by erasing the shadow of death could he truly and calmly observe his own life. He naturally wanted to find the source of his life, find the reason for his existence, but he had still lived a very tense life in the last few years and did not have much time. Only on the night that Byung-hong and Wu Cheong-bai died did he truly begin his search. Between the indistinct sea of stars and his spiritual sense was an incomparably vast and frigid black void. This was the darkest night and also the bottomless abyss. This black void was even more incorporeal, so it was impossible to pass through, as if it did not even exist. So how could it be surmounted? Chun Chong-shung gazed at the center of this black void and suddenly had a very strange feeling. He felt like he was leaning over the edge of a well, his head lowered into its deepest depths. He also felt like he was standing at the bottom of the well, gazing out at the night sky. Just which feeling was right? Or was it real? After an unknown period of time, Chun Chong-shung drew back his spiritual sense. He still sat where he had been, his gaze no longer wandering. He only quietly gazed at the gray wall, yet it seemed like he was simultaneously gazing at many places. The sea of stars calmed the mind, and the black void made all cultivators feel insignificant, helping them erase those distracting thoughts from their Tao hearts. The sound of footsteps came from behind him. Xian Yuanpo walked over and sat down at his side. To be continued. Chapter 184. Xian Yuanpo was still weak, even weaker than when he was washing dishes in the capital, but he was still alive. Moreover, his body was now filled with an extremely majestic spiritual essence and an incomparably terrifying divine aura. All of this came from Wu Cheong-bai's finger. As long as he had enough time, he would be able to convert all the true essence into his own and comprehend the laws and principles of heaven and earth represented by the sacred aura. At that time, he would become a true expert. In a sense, Xian Yuan Po's fortuitous encounter this time was really rare, even in the entire history of the cultivation world. However, he did not rejoice because of this. Instead, he felt a little down. 2 days ago, Senior taught me something very important, but I didn't manage to learn it completely. In the end, I still lost. Xian Yuan Po lowered his head and said, "Am I very useless?" Losing to a person like the Demon Lord isn't shameful. Moreover, you've succeeded in forcing them to move the transactions under the table onto the table. This is very important. Chen Chongsheng said, "As for the things Senior taught you, you still have a long time to learn them. If there's anything you don't understand, just ask me." Xian Yuan was somewhat puzzled and said, "Ask you." Chen Chongsheng said, "Before the Senior left, he taught me a set of fist arts and indicated that it was for you." Xian Yuan was somewhat sad. Looking at the slightly raised ground in the courtyard, he was silent for a long time before he said, "I will study hard." Chen Chongsheng said, "Senior and his wife's inheritance is now with you. In the future, if you have the chance, you should go to the 10,000 Years Pavilion and take a look." Xian Yuan said, "I will go as soon as possible." Chen Chongsheng stood up and raised his right hand. Xian Yuan bowed his head. Chen Chongsheng patted his shoulder, turned around, and walked out of the courtyard. He did not return to the great Taoist church of the Western Wasteland to rest. Instead, he went directly to the imperial city. After saying a few somewhat sentimental words to Luluo, he walked into that great and secret passage. As he walked out of the passageway, the snowy mountain once again came into view. However, the night was still dark and the morning light had not yet arrived. The towering mountain covered half of the starry sky, making it look like a falling star. Arriving at the black cliff on the other side of the lake, Jinyu Lu came up and asked, "What happened?" This place was far from White Emperor City, but they could still sense the activity of the morning. Chun Chongsheng said it. The bottom of the black cliff became extremely quiet. Xiao De gazed at Chen Chongsheng with a complicated expression. 2 human experts of the divine domain had died in White Emperor City. This would assuredly have a massive effect on their relationship with the demi-humans. Xiao De did not know what sort of stance Chen Chongsheng would adopt in the ensuing turmoil, so he was rather wary and uneasy. Between Chen Chongsheng's eyebrows, one could faintly see some tiredness, but there was no anger, nor was there any hostility. It was as if he wasn't affected by this matter at all. He asked, "Any progress?" Jinyu Lu shook his head and said, "Even your sword can't cut it open. There's nothing we can do." Xiao De suddenly said, "I've thought of a way to break the array, but I don't know if it's possible." Chen Chongsheng and Jinyu Lu looked at him. As a true expert ranked second on the Proclamation of Liberation and also the supreme expert of the middle generation of the demi-human race, Xiao De naturally had vast experience. Since it was his idea to break the formation, it must be logical. Therefore, Chen Chongsheng and Jinyu Lu listened attentively and seriously. The star stone is the array pivot, and this restriction is a complete array. Since it's an array, it's hard to suppress it with force. Why not break it with array formations? Xiao De's expression was very calm. No one could tell that he was nervous. Even now, he still did not know who had written that slip of paper, whether that person had evil intentions or good intentions. After hearing this, Jinyu Lu thought for a few moments, then shook his head. Using an array to break an array seems reasonable, but arrays have always been defensive, so they lack sharpness. Chen Chongsheng was also considering Xiao De's suggestion. Although he knew a few sword arrays, they were far from being able to compare to the sealing array that had imprisoned the White Emperor. At this moment, he suddenly heard a very familiar word. Xiao De asked, "What if it's a sword array?" Jinyu Lu froze at these words, but the more he thought, the more he felt that it was feasible. He excitedly said, "Correct! The sword array of South Stream Temple." He turned to Chen Chongsheng and said, I'll have to trouble Sir with this matter." Xiao also looked at Qin Changsheng. The entire continent knew of the relationship between Chen Changsheng and Holy Maiden Su Yurong, so it should be very easy to invite the disciples of South Stream Temple. There's no need to go to so much trouble. Qin Changsheng's Taoist sleeve shook, and several hundred swords flew out of their sheaths like streams. They howled through the air, taking their respective positions as they quietly hovered in the night sky. At this sight, Jin Yulu and Xiao De both paled. They had not participated in the heavenly selection ceremony and had not seen Qin Changsheng's battle with the Demon Lord, so this was their first time seeing this sight. These swords were not completely the same as the sword style of the legends, and they were even more different from the swords Xiao De had seen in the alley of the Northern Military Department. If they had only seen this storm of swords, they would have found it very difficult to guess the name of this sword style, but when they thought of the conversation they had just heard, a guess very naturally appeared in their minds. Xiao De asked in a somewhat hoarse voice, "This is the sword array of South Stream Temple." Qin Changsheng grunted in affirmation. Jin Yulu ruefully shook his head, gratified and sentimental. He was like an old wave resting on the beach, unwilling to rise again. Xiao De's expression chilled, and he said no more. He was like an iron tree that was too shy to bloom again. In the past, he had always believed that his cultivation level was higher than Qin Changsheng's, that his talent was no less. He had been unable to defeat Qin Changsheng because Su Li had passed on a sword style to him, but also because of Qin Changsheng's fortuitous encounter in the Garden of Zhou. To put it another way, this was not the fault of battle. It was just that Qin Changsheng's luck, or rather his opportunities, far surpassed his own. But now, as he gazed at the storm of swords in the darkness, sensed the awe-inspiring sword intents and the connection between them, as well as the hidden array intent, he could no longer say such words. In just a few short years, Qin Changsheng's cultivation in the path of the sword had actually grown so powerful. Just how had he done it? Was it because the Pope could obtain the support of the entire orthodoxy, or was it because of that simplest and crudest reason? Was he just such a genius? Knowing what to do did not mean that he knew how to do it. As for how to use the South Stream Temple sword array to break the sealing array in the Black Cliff, Qin Changsheng needed an hour just to find the way. Countless awe-inspiring sword intents swept across the surface of the lake, gathering the freshest and even somewhat chilly qi in the world, and then slashing at the invisible array intent surrounding the Black Cliff. Under the pressure of the sword array, the sealing array hidden in the snowy mountain gradually revealed its true form. In the depths of the mist, one could faintly make out the projection of the Starstone Wall, blocking the path ahead. As time passed, the range of the sealing array grew clearer and clearer. It far surpassed the range of the snowy peak and the Black Cliff, covering a radius of 10-some li. There were even several swords within the sword array that had left the ground and were flying up into the snowy mountain. Could that place still be within the sealing array? To be continued. Chapter 185. Using an array to break an array seemed like a very simple idea, but it was actually an idea of incomparable genius. So genius that no cultivator dared to think in this direction. In essence, this was the most typical method of grinding with water. It was also like two bronze mirrors rubbing against each other. An ordinary array formation wouldn't be able to break through this array formation. That was because this bronze mirror was too smooth and its material was too ordinary. The South Stream Temple sword array was different. This sword array had the toughest and sharpest surface, most suited to grinding objects. But even the South Stream Temple sword array would not be able to break this sealing array in a short amount of time, because it required careful grinding and caution. In terms of array, Su Yurong was truly hundreds, if not thousands, of times more talented than the vast majority of cultivators in the world, including Qin Changsheng. But Qin Changsheng was the best person to break the array, because he alone could use the South Stream Temple sword array, and also because he possessed unimaginable patience. He closed his eyes as he sat in front of the Black Cliff. From the pitch-black night to the arrival of the morning light, he remained calm, no anxiety visible on his face. How could Jin Yulu and Xiaoda, sensing the dancing sword intense in the sky and seeing the unchanging black cliff, be as calm as he? If not for the fact that their spiritual senses were powerful enough to sense that the sealing array was slowly weakening, they might have been even more worried. When they saw that Chen Changsheng remained calm, that he had not forgotten to meditate and cultivate while controlling the swords to form the South Stream Temple Sword Array, they felt deep admiration for him. As the morning light gradually brightened, Qin Changxing opened his eyes and examined the state of the sealing array in the black cliff. "I need to rest for a while. What about the two of you?" Jin Yulu and Xiaoda had already worked hard for several days and nights, without sleep or rest. They were already exhausted to the extreme, but they were not prepared to follow Qin Changxing back to White Emperor City. They could only be at ease after seeing the black cliff with their own eyes, and they certainly did not want the White Emperor to wake up and find that they were not there. Xiaoda said to Qin Changxing, "If you really can break the array, then before doing so, you must be careful of your own safety." Jin Yulu replied, "Logically speaking, if the Empress had not gone mad, she would not have killed Your Holiness, the Pope, in front of everyone. But what you and I are doing right now is highly likely to drive her mad." Qin Changsheng understood this logic. Madame Mu assuredly knew what Jin Yulu and Xiaoda were doing in the Starfall Mountains. She did not care primarily because the situation in White Emperor City was rather chaotic, making it inconvenient to disperse one's strength. More importantly, she was absolutely confident that no one on the continent could break the seal around the Black Cliff. However, if she suddenly discovered that someone could break the restriction, what would she do? Of course, water droplets could pierce through stone, but it would take many years. The South Stream Temple Sword Array could probably break the sealing array imprisoning the White Emperor. It would not need many years, but it would at least need many days. In the following days, Chen Changxing continued to stay in the Western Wilderness Taoist Temple. Occasionally, he would meet with some of the more important representatives of the Yao race, but most of the time he rested. Late at night, with Luolua's help, he would enter the Imperial City and use that secret path to the distant Starfall Mountains to use the South Stream Temple Sword Array to break the sealing array. Other than the Sher clan leader and his group, no one else knew of this matter. Thus, in the view of many people at this crucial moment, Chen Changsheng, as the Pope of the human race, seemed a little too quiet. No one would take this silence to be a sign of weakness or giving up. The human race would assuredly demand an explanation and a price for the deaths of Biyonghong and Wu Chongbai. At this moment, his silence placed an enormous pressure on White Emperor City. Qin Changxing also felt an enormous pressure because of Madame Mu's silence. His movements were very secretive and few people could discover him, but he was very sure that Madame Mu knew what he was doing. Why had Madame Mu remained so quiet these last few days, showing no reaction? Was it because she believed that the array she had constructed using the power of the tides could not be broken? But the sealing array in the Black Cliff had already been largely erased by his South Stream Temple Sword Array. Just what was Madame Mu thinking? Late at night, as Chen Changxing, dressed in a black robe, walked toward the quiet Imperial City, he was still thinking about this question. In a stone hall deep within the Imperial City, Madame Mu slowly opened her eyes. Her eyes were devoid of emotion, her thoughts a mystery. The hard stone floor still bore the scars of the battle from a few days ago. Cracks and shallow holes left by stone were everywhere, and the walls were also somewhat mottled. It seemed like the wind and rain from the western sea had eroded it for tens of thousands of years, making it seem especially old. Qin Changxing drew his gaze away from the walls and gazed into the depths of the Imperial City. In this Imperial City, many eunuchs, maids, and beast guards were loyal to Luoluo. As the situation became more and more obvious, Luoluo received more and more support, making it easier for him to enter and leave the Imperial City. But he still did not believe that Luolua's control over the imperial city had already surpassed her mother's. He knew that Madame Mu was probably watching him from some place in the palace. It was just like he had felt a few days ago when he had walked into the imperial city. That gaze from the depths of the darkness was so indifferent and devoid of emotion that it was simply impossible to fathom her true thoughts. In the last few days he had been waiting for her to suddenly appear in the darkness, but this scene had not occurred. Suddenly, he sensed that Madame Mu's gaze had left him. What did this mean? Had the silence and peace of the last few days finally come to an end? Countless holes were suddenly torn in the darkness in front of the imperial city. Countless black masks had been lifted, revealing cold and bright eyes. Even the intangible chi of the world was disrupted. The starlight descending from the night sky was slightly scattered. Several dozen demi-human experts appeared out of the darkness and surrounded Qin Changxing. The attendants preparing to enter the palace with Qin Changxing fled in fear. The demi-human expert at the very front was extremely large and exuded a terrifying pressure. He was called Xiang Qiu, the youngest son of the Xiang clan leader and also the strongest expert of this generation of the Xiang clan. Ever since he was a child, he had cultivated secret techniques deep in the mountains and rarely returned to White Emperor City. Much less appeared before the eyes of the common people. Whenever he appeared, he was an unshakable mountain. Qin Changxing stood in the shadow of this mountain, calm and silent. Xiang Qiu looked down at him and said in a chilly voice, "Your Holiness, the Pope has disguised yourself and charged into the palace. For what purpose?" Before Qin Changxing could speak, a clear and young voice brimming with dignity rang out. "If I invite teacher into the palace, do I need to report to someone in advance?" Luoluo walked out of the imperial city, accompanied by several dozen eunuchs and palace maids. Their footsteps were very dense. Soon after, even more dense footsteps came from behind, as well as the stamping of hooves, which gradually turned into a torrential rain and the faint rumble of thunder. More than 1,000 elite demi-human soldiers surged out of Heaven Guard Pavilion like a tide, their cold spears like a forest pointed at the demi-human experts. Xiang Qiu turned to the Bear tribe leader at the front of the cavalry and narrowed his eyes. "Do you want to rebel?" Footsteps and the stamping of hooves once more resounded through the darkness around the imperial city. More and more demi-human soldiers were gathering. The noise in front of the imperial city was getting more and more chaotic, but it seemed to be getting quieter and quieter. Perhaps it was because the atmosphere was getting more and more tense, more and more oppressive. No sound came from the depths of the imperial city. To be continued. Chapter 186. An even more majestic mountain appeared in front of the imperial city. It was the Xiang clan leader. He indifferently said to Qin Changxing, "It is already late at night. Not even His Holiness the Pope can enter the palace." He then turned to Luoluo and said, "Your Highness, you still need to consider the dignity of the White Emperor clan in your actions." These words sounded indifferent, but they were actually very serious. Luoluo looked at this elder who had doted on her ever since she was a child and suddenly felt that his face was very unfamiliar. Qin Changxing knew of the Xiang clan leader's status in the Council of Elders, and he could clearly sense his unfathomable strength. But his reaction was still very calm, very direct, and very unyielding. It was like a shallow stream. The water surface was like a mirror, and the bottom could be seen clearly. Between the fish there were hard rocks. He said, "I want to use the path in the imperial city to go to the Starfall Mountains to see His Majesty, the White Emperor. Why are you stopping me?" The Xiang clan leader's expression chilled. He had never imagined that Qin Changxing would confess to his intentions. Then he suddenly realized that this question was very difficult to answer. Under the current tense situation, Qin Changxing wanting to enter the imperial city in the middle of the night was very suspicious, no matter how one looked at it. He had enough reasons to object. But when Chen Changsheng expressed his intentions, those reasons for opposing him suddenly became less powerful. Why hadn't he thought of this before? The Xiang clan leader stared into Chen Changsheng's incomparably clear and calm eyes, thinking to himself, is it really true that the simpler one is, the harder it is to be confused by the miasma? But he still wanted to stop Chen Changsheng from entering the imperial city. The entire continent knows that His Majesty is quietly recuperating from his injuries. He is at a critical juncture and cannot be disturbed. His Holiness the Pope insists on seeing him. Just what are his intentions? The alliance between the two races concerns the safety of the continent. His Majesty the White Emperor cares deeply about the world. So how could he only focus on recuperating and completely ignore it? Chen Changsheng looked at him and said, "What are your intentions in not letting me see His Majesty? Are you afraid or guilty?" Although this sentence was not explained, the meaning was very clear. Who wouldn't understand? The wind in front of the imperial city seemed to instantly become several degrees colder. Xiang Qiu angrily rebuked, "Don't you dare slander me!" Chen Changsheng looked at the Xiang clan leader and continued to ask, "Is this your idea or Madame Mu's? What is the meaning of this?" He completely ignored Xiang Qiu. As the Pope, the only person in White Emperor City who had the right to speak on equal terms with him was Madame Mu. The Xiang clan leader was the head of the number 1 clan of the demi-human race and also the chief elder of the Council of Elders. Xiang Qiu was only the son of the Xiang clan leader. No matter how strong he was, what right did he have to have Chen Changsheng respond to his words? For Chen Changsheng, this wasn't deliberate disregard. It was a very normal reaction. But for Xiang Qiu, this was a great humiliation. When he noticed a change in the situation, his expression became unsightly to the extreme, and his aura became more and more gloomy. The experts who tore through the night with him and prepared to launch a historic siege still remained silent and solemn. However, the expressions of the cavalry generals who were accompanying them had clearly changed. Before Chen Changsheng said these words, no one in the demi-human race was worried about the White Emperor's safety, much less thinking about those terrifying schemes. The White Thearcha's position in the demon race was too revered. He was like a god. No one would have thought that he would be harmed by a conspiracy. Of course, the fact that Chen Changsheng's words could affect the situation was also related to his status. The words of the Pope and the words of an ordinary passerby naturally had a vastly different effect. More importantly, in the last few months, the entire continent had been talking about the story of the cinnabar pill and the legend of the Pope using his blood to save the people of the world. And because of his past experiences, the demi-human race had an extremely good impression of Chen Changsheng and did not believe that he would lie. Chen Changsheng did not wait for the mood in front of the imperial city to become even more complicated, nor did he wait for his question to be answered. "No one can stop me from seeing His Majesty the White Emperor." He looked into the Xiang clan leader's eyes and seriously said, "Not unless you kill me." After saying this, he walked forward. The imperial city, shrouded in darkness, was extremely quiet. His footsteps could be heard clearly. Several thousand elite demi-human cavalry and the demi-human experts that had either been hiding in the darkness or had revealed themselves were silently and nervously confronting each other. The same blood flowed through their bodies, and they were also sweating the same cold sweat. As Chen Changsheng's footsteps approached, the atmosphere in the imperial city grew more and more tense. As Chen Changsheng got closer and closer, the Xiang clan leader's expression grew more and more solemn. As he watched Chen Changsheng get further and further away, Xiang Qiu's complexion grew gloomier and gloomier. Chen Changsheng's words might have made some people suspicious, perhaps even changed their attitudes, but they believed that they had the ability to detain Chen Changsheng. They could even kill Chen Changsheng, and they were not afraid of killing Chen Changsheng, because they were all furious. In their view, Chen Changsheng was far too sinister. He was nothing like the Pope, more like the legendary demon military advisor Black Robe. How could he use such shameless lies to frame and slander them? The Red River Beast Guard in front of the imperial city silently opened a path, parting like a tide. Qin Changsheng walked past the Xiong clan leader, not even glancing at him. Xiong Qiu groaned at this sight, a trickle of blood trickling from the corner of his lips. He had actually suffered a hidden injury. Even so, neither he nor his father attacked Chen Changsheng, because the depths of the imperial city remained quiet in the darkness, not a single sound emerging from them. Just like this, Chen Changsheng walked into the imperial city, just as he had done several nights ago. When he was still a young Taoist from Xining village, he had also walked into the capital with this calm gaze and firm expression. And then he saw Madame Mu, under a pear tree in front of a stone hall. It was not the season for pear trees to bloom, but since the pear tree on the observation platform had bloomed, this pear tree was naturally blooming. A breeze blew, perhaps from the Starfall Mountains in the north or the Great Sea in the west. Countless white flowers fell from the branches, sprinkling on the ground and also on her body. A small white flower fell precisely on her hair, swaying in the wind. It was very beautiful, but also seemed to contain a tinge of sorrow. Her white dress was very simple and clean, but it also seemed extremely solemn. Her eyes were very black and bright, reflecting the starlight. They were extremely serene, seeming to contain the secrets of the heavens, but also like murderous intent. Her expression was very indifferent, but it also concealed an extremely faint hint of sorrow. Had someone died? Was she going to mourn? Was it that imperial uncle from the great western continent called Mu? Or someone even closer? Or was it his future self? Qin Changsheng thought of this question, but he did not want to know the answer. To be continued. Chapter 187. The Story of Choosing Heaven has released its first trailer. To be precise, it's a trailer. It's very short, but just like me, we're mainly looking at the aura. It's not bad. I've posted it on my official WeChat account and Weibo. Everyone can go take a look. As he gazed at the pear tree in front of the night hall and the pear blossoms falling on Madame Mu's body, Qin Changsheng very naturally recalled the sight he had seen a few days ago. The pear tree on the observation deck had been chopped into invisible dust by his sword. He had learned the story of the man in the painting through Luo Luo. While he was moved by Luo's deep affection, he also thought about how Madame Mu had expended considerable effort to have Luo Luo accept the demon lord. She should love her only daughter very much. So why was she so heartless in this marriage? If that conjecture was true, then why was she so cold-blooded after being in love with Bai Di for so many years? What kind of person was she? The Xiong clan is just like their bodies, tall, heavy, and cold, like uninteresting mountains. Madame Mu said, "Your Holiness, the Pope was able to ignore their existences and come here. Your methods are truly impressive." She was praising Qin Changsheng, but her line of sight didn't fall upon him. Instead, she was still looking into the distance in the darkness. That should be the north side. When I was very young, my teacher used a sentence to praise senior brother. At the same time, it was also to educate me. That sentence was, 1,000 words are not equal to a single silence. Qin Changsheng said, "From then on, I spoke much less, but in the end, I'm still not as good as my senior. I can't help but want to talk. I want to talk to the fish in the stream. I want to talk to the books in the temple, and every time I do that, I would feel guilty. Even now, when I talk to 36, I still have this feeling." Madame Mu replied, "His Majesty the Emperor has always been a mute." Senior brother comforted me in the same way. Qin Changsheng was silent for a while, then he continued. So later on, I changed that sentence into one word and followed it accordingly. Madame Mu asked, "Which character?" Qin Changsheng said, "Thousands of words cannot be said all at once." Madame Mu slowly arched her brows and asked, "Wang Po straight?" Qin Changsheng said correct. I can't be conservative and inflexible. If I think too much and say too much, it's easy for me to make too many mistakes. Since that's the case, why not be more direct? As long as you believe that what you're doing is reasonable, then just do it. Madame Mu replied, "This is a right and wrong. That is also a right and wrong." Chun Chongqing said, "But at least Wang Pe and I believe in right and wrong." Madame Mu continued, "So tonight you can cut straight to the chase and come before me?" Chun Chongqing said, "If you hold your sword and walk straight, you will usually reach your destination faster." Madame Mu sighed, "I have cultivated my entire life without hindrance, but I truly am prone to wavering in my decisions. Perhaps this is the innate weakness of women?" "Mother," Luo called out softly, wanting to say something but hesitating. Madame Mu's lips perked up, her voice tinged with derision as she said, "In truth, a girl's extroversion is also a weakness." Luo was a little sad and didn't say anything. "His Holiness the Pope is right. We should be more straightforward when doing things." Madame Mu said, "On that day on the observation platform, I should have just killed you." As she spoke, she still did not look at Chen Chongsheng, but into the distance in the darkness. In the depths of her eyes was an extremely faint hint of exhaustion and regret. Was she regretting that she had not killed Qin Chongqing that day, or was she regretting something else? Just where was she looking at? On this side of the sea, on the other side of the mountain, across from the lake, was a black cliff, the cliff covered in ice and snow that had accumulated for tens of thousands of years. Her gaze had always rested on this place, her regret deepening, her emotions fading, and her killing intent rising. A wind blew in from the western sea. The countless snowy peaks under the night sky did not change, but the ice and snow that had accumulated on the black cliff for tens of thousands of years rustled down. The ice and snow were torn to shreds by the cold wind and then swirled up, howling against the cliff and the surrounding trees. Xiaoda waved his hand and pulverized a thick and heavy tree. He raised his head in the direction of White Emperor City, the brown and yellow in his eyes growing deeper and deeper, making him seem extremely ruthless. Jin Yulu stood behind him, squinting in the same direction, his gaze cold and sharp to the extreme. They could sense the boundless divine might contained in the sea wind, but they would not retreat a single step. They were prepared to fight to the death. The White Emperor was in the black cliff behind them. Qin Chongqing had already used the South Stream Temple Sword Array to gradually grind out a weak spot in the ceiling array. With just a little more time, they would be able to see the White Emperor. Even if their and Qin Chongsheng's worst guesses came true, they would at least be able to prove Madame Mu's scheme. Madame Mu could not just watch as this scene unfolded. She would definitely stop it all. Xiaoda and Jin Yulu had already mentally prepared themselves for this. In the last few days, when Chen Chongsheng had been sitting in front of the black cliff, resisting the ceiling array, they had been silently watching their surroundings. They were waiting for the countless demi-human experts to surge in like a tide, waiting for the demi-human army to cover the entire mountain like black snow. They were waiting for Madame Mu to personally act, just like now. In the next moment, the ice and snow falling from the cliff suddenly vanished, as did the howling. Everything became quiet. It was like that wind from the western sea had never appeared, that it had always been chasing after the clouds over the sea. Xiaoda and Jin Yulu glanced at each other. They were very confused, but they did not let down their guard. On the contrary, they felt even more uneasy. "Since you wanted to kill me, why did you change your mind?" Qin Chongqing did not know what had happened in the Starfall Mountains, but he could sense the change in Madame Mu's qi. More importantly, outside the Imperial City, the Xiong clan leader and those demi-human experts that had torn through the darkness had indicated that she truly did want to kill him. But in the end, the Xiong clan leader and those demi-human experts did not attack Qin Chongsheng, only silently watched as he walked into the Imperial City. Madame Mu finally drew back her gaze from the distant mountains. She looked at Chen Chongsheng and said, Your Holiness, the Pope's question sounds very much like an invitation. Chen Changsheng replied, "If you can bear the consequences." Madame Mu fell quiet for a while, then asked, "Besides that teacher of yours, who else can bear it?" Chen Changsheng replied, "But there are still many people that want to kill me, perhaps because they have nothing to worry about." If there is nothing to worry about, there is naturally nothing to worry about. Madame Mu said, "I do not like this place, never have, but in this world, there will always be something to worry about." As she said this, she did not look at Luoluo, but at White Emperor City in the darkness. But in truth, she might have been looking even further away. The world was vast, and all living things were within it. Although the great western continent was far away, it was also within it. Luoluo lowered her head, her mood even sadder. In truth, in those years, I always envied Tianhai because, whether in terms of cultivation or willpower, she was infinitely close to the shore of freedom. There were even times when her existence made me doubt the views I had formed when I was a child. Madame Mu looked at Chen Changsheng and said, "But in the end, she still died at your hand." Chen Changsheng said nothing. Madame Mu finally said, "This matter taught me a lesson and also made me understand many things. Since we cultivate the heavenly Tao, and the heavenly Tao is emotionless, then if we want to last and finally reach the great Tao, we must sever all emotions and extinguish our natures." Chapter 188. All was quiet. The wind rustled the pear tree. The answer was revealed. Luoluo lowered her head even more. Chen Changsheng was quiet for a very long time. Finally he said, "If Empress is willing, I can treat it as if nothing happened." Madame Mu asked, "What comes after the word willing?" Chen Changsheng replied, "Our two races were originally companions, comrades in arms. We have a common enemy." Madame Mu smirked. "You speak of that person?" Chen Changsheng replied, "Correct. The demon lord should still be in White Emperor City, along with those two foreigners." That was the invitation he was issuing. He was inviting Madame Mu to kill with him. He did not want to kill an ordinary person, but the sovereign of the north of the continent, an existence as vast as the darkness. As for those two foreigners from the distant continent, they were even more unimaginable existences. Madame Mu was quiet for a while, then asked, "If I accept His Holiness's invitation, then what?" Chen Changsheng replied, "There is no then." Luoluo did not understand the conversation between her teacher and her mother. Madame Mu naturally understood. Chen Changsheng's meaning was very clear. If she accepted this invitation, he would no longer care about that black cliff. Whether the White Emperor lived or died, whether he could escape had nothing to do with him. A mocking smile appeared on Madame Mu's lips. "In the end, you've still matured." She looked at Chen Changsheng and asked, "Are you not afraid of becoming what you most loathed?" Chen Changsheng thought about the conversations he had with Tang 36 by the lake and the stream. He thought about the golden carp that was sinking into the mud. He was silent for a long time and said, "At some important moments, you have to learn how to give up." Madame Mu said, "I believe that is the greatest characteristic of maturity or decay." Chen Changsheng fell silent for another very long time. He thought about Biyang Hong and Wu Qiong, by who had just left this world. He thought about some rebellious princes entering the capital, the Tianhai Divine Empress standing on the mausoleum of books, the lotus sea before the divine path, many red flowers. "You're right. I shouldn't think this way." After saying this, he suddenly felt his entire body relax, even his sea of consciousness becoming much clearer. Madame Mu slightly arched her brows. She had not expected him to change his mind so quickly. A moment ago he had been thinking about schemes and methods, compromise and sacrifice, but now he had thrown all these thoughts to the back of his mind. Such capriciousness, in the eyes of many, should be the style of villains and women. Chen Changsheng wasn't. He was just climbing an extremely steep and lonely peak. He walked in silence for a long time, feeling a little lonely and tired. So he looked out of the cliff. Then, "I'll take my leave." Chen Chongsheng said to Madame Mu, "Madame is right. I should say these words after seeing His Majesty the White Emperor." Madame Mu's expression chilled as she said, "His Majesty will not see you." Chen Chongsheng thought for a while and said, "Maybe it's because he can't see me right now." Madame Mu looked into his eyes and asked, "If things really are as you think and he's already dead, what will you do?" Hearing these words, Luo raised her head. Her face was whiter than the pear blossoms falling from the branches. "The matter of you imprisoning the black frost dragon will spread to both shores of the Red River as quickly as possible." Chen Changxing continued, "Then I will announce that you have colluded with the demons and become an enemy of the orthodoxy." Madame Mu smiled. "Do you think I care about these things?" Of Chen Changxing's 2 sentences, the first was to incite the rage of the demi-human populace against her, while the second was to light a fire over the entire continent. But she was the empress of the demi-humans and also a saint. She had the confidence to ignore the wildfire rising from the mountains, rivers, and lakes. Chen Changxing said, "I don't know if you care, because even now, no one seems to know just what you care about." The negotiations came to an end, but it could not be said to have broken down, because from start to finish, neither side in the negotiations had clearly stated their conditions. From a certain perspective, they were both negotiating with themselves. This was not a very difficult matter to understand. To speak to the world was often to speak to oneself. Convincing the other party was far less important than convincing oneself. In the end, Madame Mu withdrew her hand and Chen Changxing withdrew his invitation, not because he had been convinced, but because they had convinced themselves. Chen Changxing used a secret path to the Starfall Mountains. Everything was already revealed to the starry sky, so Luo followed. The quiet imperial city seemed even quieter and more spacious. Madame Mu's figure seemed even more lonely and cold. Mu Jiushi walked out of the hall and stood at her side, her face brimming with worry. Madame Mu smiled at her and said, "Do you feel that your aunt is very pitiful?" Mu Jiushi subconsciously nodded, and then she came to her senses and repeatedly shook her head. The Tianhai Divine Empress was dead, and the Holy Maiden of the South had gone to the distant continent. In the present world, Madame Mu was the woman with the most noble status. But in Mu Jiushi's eyes, her aunt was truly very pitiful because she was lonely. If you want to achieve something, you need to endure something. This principle is very simple. Madame Mu caressed her face and said, "Tomorrow you should go back, because I don't want you to endure this." Mu Jiushi was shocked by these words, thinking, has the situation already worsened to this level? Her voice trembled as she said, "Why don't we fight?" In her view, this was the best chance to kill Chen Changxing, and she could even use Xuelao City as a buffer. If the human race reacted and sent more experts, what would they do then? How could Madame Mu not understand the principle of cutting a tangled knot with a swift blade? But Xian Yuan Po's appearance had disrupted the progress of the heavenly selection ceremony, and Chen Changxing had arrived too quickly, directly altering the entire situation. Most importantly, even if that person's thoughts had not completely changed, they had assuredly been affected. With the arrival of the morning light, countless swords flew through the air, returning to their sheaths like streams of light, concealing their sharpness. Chen Changxing stood up and gazed at the black cliff. His face was rather tired, but his eyes were very bright. Even with the South Stream Temple sword array as a tool, breaking the ceiling array that was on par with the Tong Palace was still a very difficult task. But everything was developing in a good direction. With just a little more time, they would probably see the answer. Jin Yulu was an elder who had participated in the northern expedition against the demons and had seen countless schemes and unimaginable incidents. He was not delighted by this progress, but his expression grew even more solemn. He said to Chen Changxing, Last night, the Empress clearly wanted to kill, but in the end, she did not strike. The reason must be found. Xiaoda added. The experts of the Xiong clan suddenly retreated. 3 armies were advancing on White Emperor City, but they suddenly stopped 200 li away. There seems to be a faint strength on the 2 shores of the Red River that changed the decision of Madame Mu and the Council of Elders. The change in the situation last night was advantageous to them, but it still made them extremely wary. The White Emperor was trapped, his fate unknown. Just where did this powerful and mysterious strength come from? Naturally, their gazes were cast to the north, in the direction of the distant Xuelao city. When Chen Chongsheng returned to White Emperor City, he received an invitation. This invitation had come from the large courtyard extremely close to the Xiong clan's estate. But in reality, everyone knew that this invitation had also come from the north, from Xuelao City. The demon lord invited Chen Chongsheng to meet. Chen Chongsheng thought it over, then accepted the invitation. However, he set the time for 4 days. For days quickly passed. A heavy snowfall fell over White Emperor City. To be continued. Chapter 189. On a certain day, long after that, the demon lord Nero watched as the blizzard descended from the sky and was swallowed up by the abyss behind the demon palace. Suddenly, he recalled that snowstorm in White Emperor City. Xuelao City was plagued by snowstorms all year round. He had seen countless blizzards, but none of them left as deep an impression on him as that snowstorm. White Emperor City was located in the south, with a warm climate and its proximity to the Western Sea, so it rarely snowed, but that snowstorm had been extremely heavy that day. In just half a night, the city by the Red River had been covered in snow, and the yellow sand in that courtyard had been dyed white. The demon lord drew back his gaze from the abyss and said to Chen Chongsheng, "I was wrong. That day, I should have paid any price to kill you." Nank indifferently replied, "I also thought the same." Chen Chongsheng was covered in blood, but his expression was very calm. That's already in the past. In that snowstorm that had been going on for a very long time, Chen Chongsheng arrived at the courtyard not far from the Xiong clan's estate. The demon lord truly had no intention of killing him, at least not at the very start. Chen Chongsheng pushed open the gate to the courtyard and walked in. The soles of his boots crunched against the soft, new snow, a very pleasant sound. He was still wearing a plain Taoist robe, but he had added a large cloak over it. The cold wind rustled the snow on the ground, quickly erasing his footprints and lifting up a corner of the cloak. Deep within the courtyard was a tree, and beneath the tree was a small clay stove. There was tea on the stove, and there were 2 seats between the stoves. The demon lord sat on the seat to the north. The seat to the south was empty. Chen Chongsheng walked under the tree. The tea in the pot just happened to begin to boil, giving off a pleasant sound. It was just like the demon lord's voice. 1,000 years. Chen Chongsheng understood the meaning of the demon lord's words. He believed that those who knew about today's conversation would have similar sentiments at this time. A full 1,000 years ago, Emperor Taizong and the previous demon lord had a conversation in Luoyang. That conversation was so famous that no one on the continent did not know of it. Even after 1,000 years, it was still a topic that many people recalled and sighed with emotion. Even after tens of thousands of years, this conversation would probably still occupy the most important chapter in the annals of history. This conversation would decide the future state of the entire continent. The humans submitted and paid tribute, while the demon wolf cavalry returned to the north. To the human race, this conversation should have been the greatest humiliation. But because Zhou Dufu had appeared in the willows, it had a different meaning. From this perspective, this conversation was not just between Emperor Taizong and the previous demon lord, but a conversation between 3 great men. After 1,000 years, the leader of the human race and the sovereign of the demon lord finally met once more, and they were about to have a conversation. How could they not feel perplexed? Chen Chongsheng said There are no bystanders in our conversation today, so we may soon disappear into history. The demon lord replied, In the future, I will have the scribe record our conversation today and request that every child be able to recite it. Chun Changxing shook his head and said, I won't do that because I don't think it's important. The posture of these two sentences was completely different, but the meaning was very similar. Both the demon lord and Chun Changxing exuded an extremely powerful, even terrifying confidence. How the history books recorded it, or whether to record it or not, was the right of the victor. After the initial conversation ended, the courtyard remained quiet for a very long time. The tea on the stove was incessantly boiling, but the demon lord had no intention of pouring tea. He only calmly gazed at Chun Changsheng. Chun Changsheng was also calmly gazing at the demon lord. This was not his first meeting with the demon lord. To be more precise, it was his third time. But this was his first time clearly seeing the demon lord's face. Just like the vast majority of the demon imperial family, the demon lord's face was extremely pale. It was not like jade, not like snow, but rather strange. But it was not a sickly appearance, more like a sign that he was different from the world, giving off an inhuman feeling. The demon lord suddenly laughed. His smile was rather strange, revealing more of his gums, contrasting with his pale complexion. It was not particularly unsightly, but rather bloody. You truly are an interesting person, the demon lord said. Or perhaps you are not human, because your body does not have the chi of a human. You are more like an object? Chun Changxing had thought that the demon lord might vaguely know of his origins, perhaps even more so. But it did not matter. Whether it was an object or a fruit, the demon lord knew who he was, and that was enough. His Tao heart would naturally not be disturbed by a few words. The demon lord saw that Chun Changxing did not respond, and his smile faded. He indifferently said, I came to White Emperor City this time mainly for 3 matters. Based on his solemn tone, it was assuredly a major matter. Chun Changxing thought about it, but he could only think of one. The demon lord naturally would not speak of what had happened in the wildfire of the celestial tree. He said, Up until now I have completed 1.5, and then today. Chun Changxing asked, It has something to do with me? The demon lord replied, Of course, because the most important matter is to see you. Chun Changxing asked, When you left Xuelao City, you were sure that you would meet me here? The demon lord replied, I was prepared to marry Princess Luoluo, and the demi-human race was prepared to ally with me. You would definitely come, so we would definitely meet. Chun Changxing asked, Why must you meet me? The demon lord replied, I thought that if I could not kill you, I would ask you a question. Chun Changxing asked, What question? The demon lord asked, What is the goal of our lives? Chun Changxing fell silent. A few days ago, after Byonghong had left the world, he had sat in the courtyard, gazing at the countless stars in the night sky, sensing that black nothingness that was like the mouth of a well. He had once thought of this question. In truth, in the many nights after the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, he had thought of this question. In the view of many people, this question was too abstruse, a little sour, and the scholarly spirit that made one want to laugh. But this was truly a question worth thinking about. People like him and the demon lord naturally understood this principle. In different positions, one must do different things, consider different problems. The demon lord indifferently said, We are the highest existences in the world, so we must see the furthest. Chun Changxing fell quiet for a while, then asked, Where does your gaze fall? The demon lord replied, Above the sea of stars. Chun Changxing understood what he meant. The demon lord added, And for all autumns and generations to come. Any other ordinary person would definitely not have understood this conversation. But the demon lord knew that Chun Changxing could assuredly understand. Chun Changxing truly did understand, because this was also what he thought, because he was the Pope of the human race. The demon lord explained, "This is responsibility and also pressure, but it is also the greatest source of pleasure, the firmest meaning of existence. Just what is above the sea of stars, the other races of the sacred light continent?" Chun Chongqing calmly stared into the demon lord's eyes and asked, "Just what is your relationship with them? What is a fire thief?" To be continued. Chapter 190. The demon lord calmly gazed at him for a very long time. Then he suddenly laughed. The gums revealed in his smile, and his pale face made Qin Chongqing think of the words snow white and blood red. In the end, the demon lord gave no explanation, only saying, "You only need to know that I was born and raised on this continent." Qin Chongqing recalled the words Wang Jitsa had written in his notebook. Position is relative. The demon lord's meaning was clear. Since he was from this side, he was not from that side. This sounded like nonsense, but in fact, it was the most important statement. Qin Chongqing saw endless ambition and almost divine callousness in the demon lord's eyes. He saw calm and indifference, but he saw no lies. He was quiet for a while, then said, "I have some thoughts about the sacred light continent." A hint of admiration flashed through the depths of the demon lord's eyes, but it quickly transformed into a chill. He understood Chun Chongqing's meaning because he also had his own thoughts on this matter. It was precisely because of this that he was even more wary of Chun Chongqing. Whether it was Shang Xingzhou, the white emperor couple, Black Robe, or the demon commander, no matter how cunning and farsighted they were, the demon lord did not particularly care. He was still young and had plenty of time to grow. Moreover, it was precisely because he was young that he possessed many of the qualities that those elders had lost. But now he was facing the similarly young Qin Chongqing, and he could also see those qualities on his opponent's body. This made him feel rather uneasy. But now was not the time for them to meet to the death, because this conversation was not over. It could even be said that it had only just begun. If, in the end, Qin Chongqing still could not give him an answer that satisfied him, they would discuss it again. "Have you ever considered joining hands with me to do some things?" The demon lord used a very casual tone to raise the truly important question of the day. Qin Chongqing did not think for very long before giving his answer. The hatred between the two sides is too deep. No one has the right to negotiate peace, not even the thought of it. The demon lord shook his head. People like Tang II naturally do not have the right because they are subjects. As long as they have this thought, they will be disloyal. But we are different because we are sovereigns. We are the guides that lead our people forward, so we naturally have the right to choose our path. As he watched the snowflakes that instantly melted on the teapot, Qin Chongqing recalled the conversation he had not long ago in the Tang clan's old estate in Wenshui City. The snow that day was also quite heavy, and they talked about the same topic. It was not particularly silent, but it was bone-chilling cold. What would the future of the continent look like? What kind of relationship should the three races have? Countless sages and sages had thought of these questions. Although the answer was a little difficult to say, it didn't need to be said. Everyone knew that it should be peace. But in the Tang clan's old estate in Wenshui City, the Tang old master had said a few words that indicated that this was, at least for now, impossible. In the hundreds of years that he could see, it was impossible. Qin Chongqing thought of the siege of Luoyang and said, "Demons eat humans." The demon lord looked into his eyes and said, "I won't eat." Qin Chongqing said, "Hatred won't disappear because of this. Your people won't forget what happened in the northern expedition just because I didn't slaughter your tribe." The demon lord replied, "The demi-human race can forget the hatred of the past, so why can't the human race? After all, it's just a matter of time." Qin Chongqing said, "Perhaps after many years, the human race really will be able to forget the hatred of the past. But it's very difficult right now. Not even I can do it." The demon lord arched his brows. "You didn't experience my race's invasion of the South, and you lived in the era when the human race was the most glorious. I don't understand where your hatred comes from. I've read many books, and many stories of the past are recorded in these books. I have the deepest memory of one of these stories. Chen Chongsheng thought of the history of the previous dynasty he had read in the library of the Orthodox Academy. After a moment of silence, he continued, when the demons invaded the south, their momentum was like a raging fire. The human race coincided with internal strife and was powerless to resist. The divine General Li of the previous dynasty led 3,000 elite cavalry to defend Snowhold Pass. Isolated and helpless, he managed to hold on for a year, until Chen Xuanba appeared. The demon lord narrowed his eyes, a cold light flashing through them. There was no one on the continent who did not know of this famous defense of the city, and it had given rise to a massive controversy that was still debated to this day. Even the debaters of Xuelao City would often bring up this matter to discuss. Just what did Qin Chongsheng mean by suddenly bringing it up? It was not a defense, but a defense to the death. Chen Chongsheng picked up the teapot on the stove and poured himself a cup of tea. Then he looked at the snowflakes that fell into the teacup and melted, remaining silent for a very long time. In the past, Snowhold Pass might have been covered in such cold snow every day. Would those soldiers and commoners have had a cup of hot tea to drink? Naturally not, because there was no more food and the barks of the trees had been stripped bare. It was even worse than the siege of Luoyang. When Chen Xuanba led his cavalry to drive away the demon wolf cavalry and entered Snowhold Pass, he saw a scene from hell on earth. Of the 3,000 elite cavalry, 1,400 had survived, but many of the commoners, women, and children had died, and it was said that many had been eaten. The person who had beheaded his concubine and distributed her flesh to the soldiers was Li Sun, who had always been famed for his benevolence. This matter had given rise to a massive controversy. Even now, 1,000 years later, it was still being discussed. Those people back then probably did not know whether they had done the right thing or not, right? Snowhold Pass had to be defended, or else the demon wolf cavalry would be able to march straight in and threaten the heart of the human race. Tianliang County would no longer have any chance to breathe, and the human race would not be able to hold on until the turning point. But was this the right thing to do? Even the scholar who most hated the demons, even Chen Xuanba who most loved and respected Li Sun, could only remain silent on this question. But the majority of the people involved no longer needed to know the answer. When the siege of Snowhold Pass was broken, Li Sun committed suicide on the spot. From the deputy general to the lowest soldier, the thousand-some soldiers had died on the battlefield. Chen Chongsheng said to the demon lord, "I do not know how to evaluate them. The demons ate people, and they also ate people, and they ate their own kind, but what if they had not been able to defend Snowhold Pass? You would have eaten even more people." The demon lord asked, "So you hate my divine race so much?" "I did not make it clear before. This is not hate." Chen Chongsheng fell quiet for a while, then continued, "I just want to strive so that such a tragedy will never again occur in the human race, so that there will never be a need to evaluate such a thing again." The meaning of his words was crystal clear. If such a tragedy that was difficult to evaluate would occur in future history, he hoped that it would occur on the side of the demons, not the side of the humans. To be continued. Chapter 191. Qin Chongsheng was not Shangxingzhou. He did not have the ambition or will to completely exterminate the demon race, but he had his own ideas. He hoped that the demon race would become extremely weak, so weak that they would not dare to have any other thoughts about the human race for the foreseeable future. The demon lord had a very calm expression, devoid of anger. "And then you will open trade with us. The two imperial clans can even intermarry, and you will forcefully ban the divine race's language and characters, leaving only those paintings and statues? Very coincidentally, this is also my plan." Qin Chongsheng silently gazed at the gradually freezing tea in his cup. There had never been anything new under the starry sky. At this point, this conversation, this negotiation, could no longer continue. The demon lord asked. What I don't understand is, since your ideas are so firm, why did you come to see me? Chun Chongxing replied, because I want to know why you wanted to see me. The demon lord looked into his eyes and said, even if you are not willing to negotiate, we can still cooperate. Unable to negotiate, but able to cooperate, they were naturally targeting a third party. This was also what Chen Chongxing had been most confused about before coming here. The current situation was that the demi-humans had already decided to ally with Shualao City, so their target was naturally the human race. What did the demon lord mean by cooperation? Did he feel that Madame Mu could no longer control the situation? Would the demi-humans ultimately maintain their alliance with the human race? If this really was the case, what reason did Chen Chongxing have to cooperate with him? The situation has changed. The demon lord raised his head to the plummeting snow and said, on that night 4 days ago, the entire flavor of White Emperor's city changed. Chun Chongxing knew what he was talking about and replied, I don't need to feel uneasy. The demon lord shook his head. I don't know what the White Emperor is thinking, and neither do you. Chun Chongxing noticed that he was speaking of the White Emperor, not Madame Mu. The demon lord said, I've always suspected that the White Emperor was pretending to be asleep. Chun Chongxing was quiet for a while, then said, it's also possible that something really did happen to him. The demon lord mocked. Is it your habit to think the worst of everything? Chun Chongxing replied, I'm just thinking on the bright side. The two of them understood each other's meaning. The demon lord replied, you're too naive. Anyone who underestimates the White Emperor will be punished, even my mighty father. Chun Chongxing asked, if the White Emperor wasn't heavily injured and imprisoned, what was he trying to do by hiding it from the world? The demon lord replied, of course it's to sit on the mountaintop and watch the tigers fight. Don't forget, he has always been the world's most tyrannical tiger, callous and ruthless. Chun Chongxing said, you seem to be afraid of him. Old people are scary. They smell rotten. A look of disgust appeared on the demon lord's face, as if he really had smelled something unpleasant. Chun Chongxing said, what does this have to do with me? The demon lord looked into his eyes and said, we are all carrying a heavy shell on our backs, crawling forward step by step. This is very tiring. Chun Chongxing remained silent. The demon lord's eyes deepened. How about we help each other and lift off that heavy shell? Chun Chongxing quietly looked at him and said, you want me to kill my teacher? So what? I even killed my father, and that teacher of yours has always been a madman. A strange expression appeared on the demon lord's face. I just don't understand. Why does he find you so unpleasing to the eye? Chen Chongxing did not explain. This was a problem between him and Shang Xingzhou, not something that outsiders could understand. It's impossible for you to kill Shang Xingzhou by yourself. The demon lord said, I can help you. Once all those old scoundrels are dead, we can fight again. Wouldn't that be delightful? Chun Chongxing replied, in my fight with my teacher, the demons will benefit the most. The demon lord said, I understand what you mean, so before that, I will also express my sincerity. Even though Chun Chongxing had no such thoughts, he couldn't help but be shocked speechless at these words. In the snowy plains of the northern demon realm, just who could be mentioned in the same breath as Shang Xingzhou? Chun Chongxing had never imagined that the demon lord had actually been preparing to fall out with the person who had assisted him in his ascension to the throne, the person who had done the greatest service, even his teacher. He had not imagined it, and he naturally found it hard to believe. These emotions appeared in his eyes. The demon lord knew that this was truly very difficult to convince, but he could not give a reason. If you agree, I will naturally not fight with you over Su Yorong and that female student of yours. I can even give my sister to you. The demon lord smiled at Chun Chongxing. In any case, she will always be with you. Chun Chongxing still found it impossible to understand. Just what do you want? The demon lord replied. I've already said what I want. If you make up your mind in the future, there is no harm in telling me in a letter. Chen Changxing asked, A letter? The demon lord replied, In the past, Grand Scholar Tungus and the Pope of your generation often exchanged letters. We can also imitate them. Chen Changxing thought this over, then said, If we can both leave White Emperor City alive, I will give you a letter. Yes, survival was the prerequisite for everything. Putting aside the many dangers hidden in White Emperor City, they were both the greatest threats to each other. No matter how much peace talks, cooperation, assistance, or even friendship had been mentioned in this conversation, if they had the chance, they would not hesitate to kill each other, like this moment when the conversation ended. Snow incessantly fell. The only tree in the courtyard had already turned white. The only color came from the small clay stove, because the stove and the teapot were hot, and for some reason the water in the teapot had never boiled dry. Chun Changsheng and the demon lord said no more. They quietly sat for a very long time, gradually becoming two snowmen. Outside the courtyard were countless snowmen. Furthest away were the leaders of the demi-human tribes, as well as a few valiant experts. On the carriageway near the stone wall were several hundred Xiang clan suicide soldiers, led by Xiang Qiu, warily watching the area ahead. The Xiang clan leader stood at the very front, already a majestic, snowy mountain. But he was not the closest to the courtyard. Closest to the courtyard were 5 carriages, the Archbishop of the Western Wastes and the priests standing behind the carriages, all of them extremely respectful. Besides the 5 carriages, there was also a group of people standing in the snow outside the courtyard. These people included government laborers, a girl selling cosmetics, a fortune teller, an old man selling sesame candy, and a blind zither player. The Xiang clan leader stared at the blind zither player, his expression extremely solemn. As one of the strongest experts of the demi-human race, he, who was already half a step from the divine, could not even see through this blind zither player? And just who were the people in those 5 carriages? To be continued. Chapter 192. White Emperor City had snowed for half the night and an entire day. All the streets and alleys had turned white, and the people standing motionless outside the courtyards had long since become snowmen. Only, from time to time, hot air would spurt out from their snow-covered mouths and noses. It was a rather strange sight. Countless gazes fell on this courtyard, wanting to know what the demon lord and Qin Changxing were discussing. If they could not come to an agreement, when would they strike? Luo Luo stood by the window, quietly watching the snow. She did not know what was being discussed in the courtyard, but she knew that her teacher would not agree to anything. Madame Mu was also looking at the small courtyard in the snow. She had the same opinion as Luo Luo, so she was waiting to see who would strike first. The gate to the courtyard was tightly shut. No sound came out, only the flapping of snow against the stone walls. The ground was covered in white snow, transforming into that snowy plain outside Shualao City. The sole branch of that tree was covered in snow, like countless white pillars. Qin Changxing and the demon lord quietly sat in the snow. Just a moment ago, they had been sincerely conversing, discussing cooperation and possible friendship. They had even said that if they could both leave Shualao City alive, they should maintain correspondence. But now, the situation had become extremely dangerous. It seemed like they could strike at any moment, using their most powerful techniques to reap the other's life. This change was extremely sudden, so sudden that anyone other than the 2 involved would find it absurd. It was just that no one had seen it. Chen Changsheng and the demon lord did not find this change absurd, because from the very start, from the observation platform to this place, they had always wanted to kill each other. Whether it was negotiations or conversations, they were all minor matters aside from killing each other, and they both had the ability to kill each other. On the observation platform, Chen Changxing had used the South Stream Temple Sword Array to break the demon lord's technique, but he had not continued to attack. This was because Madame Mu had summoned all the clouds in the city to stop him, and also because he had vaguely sensed danger. The demon lord was probably hiding a method in his sleeve that could kill him, though he did not know what it was. The demon lord had a better understanding of Chen Chongqing's strength and methods, but he was not confident, especially when the 5 carriages arrived outside the courtyard. He looked into Chen Chongqing's eyes and said, "Shang Xingzhou cannot come, nor can Wang Pa, so who will come today?" Chen Chongqing said, "Since that's the case, Black Robe and the demon commander won't be able to come. Even if the 8 great mountain men are still alive, they probably won't be able to come." They had already discussed this issue on the observation deck. At this time, they said these 2 sentences again because they had already decided to give up, but they were a little reluctant, so they wanted to make one last confirmation. After saying this, Chen Chongqing and the demon lord fell silent for a very long time, and then they sighed at the same time. These 2 sighs that represented giving up were filled with regret. Today, the wind and snow were extremely strong. The opportunity was too good. The demon lord was far away from Shualao City, and the Pope was far away in a foreign land. This sort of situation was far too rare, and it would probably be very difficult to see it again in the future. How could he not be disappointed that he was unable to kill the other party today? Come to think of it, killing you won't do me much good. The human race will become more united and angry. The demon lord looked at Chen Chongqing and sighed. From this perspective, your existence is truly meaningless. The corner of Chen Chongqing's lips lifted slightly, revealing a smile like the spring breeze, and said, "I'm used to it." From the moment he was born, his existence had been a scheme aimed at the Tianhai Divine Empress. His existence had never had any meaning. To put it another way, he should never have appeared in this world. But he was currently searching, and it could be said that he had already found it. The demon lord slightly tilted his head. Seeing the smile on Chen Chongqing's face and confirming that it was not forced, he arched his brows. "You truly are a monster." Chen Chongqing had received many evaluations, the vast majority of them very positive. Fresh, clean, persistent genius. Even his enemies would at most say that he was a little slow, too stubborn, or question his unwisdom in handling his relationship with Shang Xingzhou. But this was the first time he had been considered a monster. Chen Chongqing was not angry. On the contrary, he found the demon lord's view very interesting, somewhat close to what he believed to be true. As the saying went, the person that understood you the most was not your friend, but your opponent. Thus, the demon lord might be his true opponent. As he thought of these things, he took up the cup of tea that was almost frozen and poured it onto the snow in front of him. This was a memorial to those people who had died to the demon wolf cavalry. He was a guest, so he should be the one to take his leave. He stood up, brushed off the snow on his body, nodded to the demon lord, and walked out of the courtyard. As he watched his back, the demon lord suddenly said, "The White Emperor will definitely be very disappointed." Chen Chongqing stopped and asked, "Why not Madame Mu?" The demon lord replied, "Since you are not willing to cooperate with me, Madame Mu is my firmest supporter." Chen Chongqing was quiet for a while, then asked, "Just what does Madame Mu want to do?" The great Western continent's imperial clan has always prided itself on being orthodox, and her line even has the blood of the elf race. Do you think that she will like humans? The demon lord sighed. And she's an Aquarius. Who knows what she's thinking? Chen Chongqing knew that the demon lord was speaking of the constellations popular in Shualao City, but he had no idea what Aquarius signified. He shook his head in confusion and continued walking out of the courtyard. The demon lord's hand slowly caressed the 2 cold stone statues in his sleeve, a hint of loathing appearing on his brow. He then turned to that perfectly straight footprint in the snow that seemed to have been measured with a ruler and muttered to himself, "They actually moved the entirely palace over. They're truly afraid of death." With a creak and a few snowflakes falling, Qin Changxing pushed open the gate and walked out. This sound and sight quickly spread to all of White Emperor City. The majority of people felt much more relaxed, but a few people felt very disappointed, shocked, confused, and all sorts of other emotions. People began to descend from the 5 carriages. Taoist Siyuan of the Hall of Subjugation, Archbishop and Lin of the Divine Edict, Linghai Jiwang of the Hall of Heavenly Judgment, the newly appointed Archbishop of the Hall of Announcements, who 32, of the 5 prefects of the Orthodoxy, other than Mao Chu, who had remained behind to guard the Li Palace, the other 4 had all rushed to White Emperor City, tens of thousands of li away, each carrying a precious treasure. Qin Changxing first solemnly bowed to the blind zither player, and then he spoke to Linghai Jiwang and the others. The azure curtain was slightly lifted, shaking off the snow. An elegant and handsome young master walked out from the last carriage. It was Tang 36. In his right hand was a seemingly inconspicuous short staff. Qin Changsheng was about to say something to him, but Tang 36 threw the short cane at him. Linghai Jiwang's complexion turned extremely unsightly at this sight, and Enlin couldn't help but softly exclaim, "That unremarkable staff was the Orthodoxy's divine staff. If not for Qin Changxing's quick reaction, it would have fallen into the snow. What if it was broken?" Tang 36 acted like he did not see the gazes of Linghai Jiwang and the others. He angrily said, "In the future, don't always make me do this sort of thing." In order to break the seal of the Red River, the Orthodoxy's divine staff had been completely drained of the energy of light. In the last few days, it had been receiving sustenance in the Taoist Church of the Western Wastes. Today, Qin Changxing was going to meet with the Demon Lord, so he had to make thorough preparations. The only person he could trust and was qualified to wield the staff was Tang 36. Even if Linghai Jiwang and the others found Tang 36 to be an eyesore, they could not deny it, because Tang 36 had done this sort of thing before. The person who had received the divine staff from the Pope had never been Qin Changxing, but him. To be continued. Chapter 193. In the battle over the Bridge of Helplessness, Qin Changxing had narrowly defeated Su Yorong, thus confirming his position as successor to the Orthodoxy. But that night, he did not go to the Light Palace. Instead, he went to Fortune Peace Road to eat beef ribs with Su Yorong. Under countless shocked gazes, the person who raised his hand to ask for leave for him was Tang 36. The one who had lowered his head to receive the divine staff that represented the authority of the Orthodoxy was also Tang 36. Today, it was still Tang 36 who was using the divine staff to control the Li Palace's array and lock onto the courtyard full of snow. This kind of pressure was too great. Even someone like Tang 36 didn't want to experience it again. Qin Changsheng looked at him and smiled. He turned around and looked at the courtyard in the wind and snow. His smile gradually disappeared. The gathering of the halls in White Emperor City was tantamount to moving the Li Palace's grand array over. If the Demon Lord had attacked earlier, he really would have taken the risk and tried to kill him. Regrettably, but also perhaps rejoicing, the Demon Lord had not intervened. Based on the current situation, Madame Mu would not give them another chance like today. If he and the Demon Lord could both safely leave White Emperor City, then there's something that I need your help with, he said to Tang 36. Tang 36's expression changed slightly and asked, "What is it?" Qin Changxing said, "Help me write a few letters." Tang 36 didn't understand what letter he wanted him to write. Suddenly, he thought of a possibility, and his expression became very interesting. "A love letter? Even though your literary talent isn't as good as mine, why do you need to learn from those foolish youths? Could it be that you want to write to Princess Luoluo and are afraid that the Holy Maiden will see it?" Qin Changxing wanted to explain, but in the end, he could only shake his head helplessly. Tang 36 had only arrived at White Emperor City this morning. Because he had come in such a hurry, he did not bring too many of the Tang family's subordinates. He only brought five-kind man. It was the five-kind man from Winshui City a few days ago. In the struggle between Shang Xingzhou and Chen Changsheng, the Tang Old Master was still biased toward the former. But when it came to major matters related to the demon race, his response was extremely clear. As long as Chen Changsheng needed something, he would provide it. The people of the orthodoxy had also arrived in the wee hours of the morning. Chen Changsheng had known of this matter the entire time, so when the demon lord invited him to meet, he had set the meeting today. The Tang Old Master had sent his strongest force, and the Li Palace had sent even more. It could even be described as vast and mighty. After Hu 32 brought back Chen Changsheng's decree, Dao Siyuan set out from the Li Palace that very night. Along the way, he rendezvoused with Ling Haizhiwang and Enlin and led the 7,000 orthodoxy cavalry from the Mount Song Army headquarters to the western plains. After passing through the Song Province Army headquarters, they met up with the Bear tribe and quietly entered the Red River region. The 7,000 papal cavalrymen were currently hidden in the mountains on the other side of the river. Although they could not shake the overall situation of the demi-humans, they could still serve as a form of intimidation. As for the 4 archbishops who carried the treasures of the Li Palace with them, they were a valiant force that no one could ignore. With the expulsion of Mu Jiushi and the execution of Taoist Baisher, the 6 prefects of the orthodoxy had been replaced with the upper Hu 32, leaving 5. 4 of them had left the capital and come to White Emperor City, tens of thousands of li away. Mao Qiu had not come. Many people believed that this prefect of the orthodoxy with the highest cultivation level had not come because he had to guard the Li Palace. However, Chen Changsheng knew that this was not the case. It was because Mao Qiu was in seclusion, waiting for the heavenly secrets that would allow him to break into the divine. The matter of White Emperor City was naturally extremely important, and the safety of the Pope was of the utmost importance. However, in Chen Changsheng's view, Mao Qiu was at an important moment. Whether or not he could be disturbed by external forces and successfully enter the divine domain were equally important matters. He turned to Ling Haizhiwang and asked, "Who is standing guard for Principal Mao?" The Heavenly Tao Academy is temporarily managed by Taoist Shu Exin. Zhuang Jihuan has been living in the Li Palace this entire time. Ling Haizhiwang added, "Besides them, the Archbishop of the Temple Seminary and several senior sisters of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green have also been at his side." Zhuang Jihuan had been born in poverty, but because he had received financial aid for his studies, he had always been close to the Winshui Tangs. After serving as Mao Qiu's deputy for many years, he had finally become the principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy several years ago. Whether it was in terms of cultivation, strength, insight, or methods, they were all extraordinary. With him personally standing guard for Mao Qiu and those similarly powerful figures of the 6 Ivies, Chen Changsheng logically had nothing to worry about. However, when he thought of Zhuang Jihuan's son, he couldn't help but have a rather strange expression. Everyone present knew of the story of the garden of Zhou and Zhuang Huanyu's tragic suicide by the well, so they understood Chen Changsheng's worries. Ling Haizhiwang glanced at Dao Siyuan, but Dao Siyuan pretended not to see, and Lin felt very helpless. She stepped forward and said to Chen Changsheng, before leaving, the venerable Taoist issued a decree ordering the Prince of Xiang to take charge of this matter. Chen Changsheng was at first surprised at these words, but then he came to his senses and said no more. It was obvious that his teacher would not do anything in the current situation, so having the Prince of Xiang take charge of this matter was probably to reassure him. Ling Haizhiwang and Daoist Siyuan seemed to have different thoughts. Chen Changsheng asked, "What's wrong?" Daoist Siyuan explained, before Priest Xian went to Fengyang City, he met with a Taoist from the Monastery of Eternal Spring. Chen Changsheng fell silent. Priest Xian had gone to Fengyang City and died there. This was to make Biyang Hong and Wu Qiong believe that the person who killed their son was Chen Changsheng. "Master, do you really want me to die so badly?" Chen Changsheng could no longer remember how many times he had thought of this question since the coup of the Mausoleum of Books. The situation had changed, and both the imperial court and Shang Xingzhou were placing their hopes on him to do something in White Emperor City. But who knew how deep this obsession ran? Ling Haizhuang said with a gloomy expression, "At this crucial moment, if someone stabs a knife in the back, it will be very difficult to deal with." The orthodoxy possessed an unimaginable reserve and hidden strength. Even if Chen Chongqing brought the entire Li Palace to White Emperor City, it still wouldn't matter. But if Shang Xingzhou did not want to see the orthodoxy gain another expert of the divine domain, who could stop him? Chen Chongqing indicated that there was no need to discuss this matter any further. Ling Haizhuang and Daoist Siyuan were a little surprised, but they said no more. After traveling tens of thousands of li and enduring a long period of pressure outside the Snow Wind Academy, the people of the Orthodoxy and Tang 36 were extremely tired, but they couldn't rest yet because Chen Chongqing needed their opinions on a certain matter. The Taoist church became very quiet. Ever since the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, the return of the human race's divine domain experts to the Sea of Stars had become a very common occurrence in the last few years. But in the end, this was an internal struggle of the human race, and Bianghong and Wu Qiongbai had died at the hands of a foreign race. Ling Haizhuang declared, "Madame Mu must die." Not even the prefects of the Orthodoxy had the right to speak about the life and death of a saint. In the past, this could have been called wild speculation, but he had said this, and the crowd was very calm, because in their view, this was a matter of course. To be continued. Chapter 194. Daoist Siyuan and Enlin said nothing, but they clearly supported Ling Haizhuang, who 32 sighed and said it's not easy to kill, but it still has to be killed. Tang 36 turned to Chen Chongqing. He had no opinion on this matter, so he wanted to see what Chen Chongqing thought. Chen Chongqing thought for a while, then nodded. The matter was decided. The people in the Taoist church might not be able to kill Madame Mu, but Madame Mu had to die one day, because this was the will of the Li Palace, the will of the human race. Chen Chongqing had once said to Luoluo that the demi-human race had to pay a sufficient price for the deaths of Bianghong and Wu Qiongbai. He had not said it clearly at the time, but Luoluo knew what he meant, Madame Mu's death. No one was willing to die, much less a saint, even if she was the constellation of Aquarius that the demon lord spoke of, her spiritual world different from the rest. So Chen Chongqing could not understand why Madame Mu had suddenly stopped on that night 4 days ago and not killed him. If that strength that flowed through the streets of White Emperor City like an undercurrent and intimidated the countless tribes along the 2 shores of the Red River did not come from Shuilao City, then where did it come from? Chen Chongqing gazed thoughtfully at the night sky outside the hall. The wind and snow had already stopped. There were no clouds in the night sky, and one could clearly see the many stars. Was it snowing in that mountain range to the north that was also illuminated by the many stars? Even if it was not snowing, the ice and snow accumulated on those mountains were probably cold enough. Why was that mountain range called the Starfall Mountains? Countless years ago, the heavenly tomes fell in the heart of the continent while streams of fire spread everywhere. There were many in Mount Han, but were there also many here? If the Starfall Mountains were dug up, would they see the remains of stars, or would they see nothing? In a certain building deep within the imperial city, there was a pot of golden-threaded sculpture from Shuilao City. Madame Mu calmly gazed at it, her expression very calm. It was like she did not care what had happened in today's snowstorm, or perhaps nothing had happened at all. This is the most famous work of my race's Master Gasso from 400 years ago. The demon lord walked in from outside the hall and said, "I didn't expect that it had always been in Sir's hands. It is indeed art. Unfortunately, there are not many people in this city who can appreciate it with me." Madame Mu drew back her gaze from the complex lines of the carving that seemed to contain the infinite beauty of the starry sky. She turned to the demon lord and said, "His Majesty also does not seem interested." The demon lord smiled. "What do you want to say?" Madame Mu calmly asked. "Why has His Majesty not moved today?" The demon lord said, "I didn't think that Chen Chongqing would be so afraid of death that he actually moved the entirely palace over." Madame Mu indifferently asked, "Has your Majesty lost confidence because of this?" The demon lord calmly gazed at her. "A few days ago, on the observation platform, you stopped me from acting. Why are you advising me now?" Madame Mu's voice became even lighter, as dull as the western sea when there was no wind. "Times have changed." The demon lord's eyes suddenly turned deep and serene. "For days ago you also did not act. When was that?" Madame Mu did not directly answer his question. "If your Majesty acts today, I will naturally act as well." They both wanted Chen Chongqing to die, but in the end, it was still a question of who would act first. Chen Chongqing was very difficult to kill. His cultivation level was even higher than rumored, and even more troublesome was that he had moved the entirely palace over. With the cultivation levels of those prefects of the orthodoxy and the precious treasures they carried with them, even Madame Mu found it rather troublesome. Back in the Li Palace, she had clearly sensed the killing intent formed from the laws of the world. And now more and more demi-human personages and ordinary people in White Emperor City were standing on Chen Chongqing's side. There was not a single cloud in the night sky, the countless stars shining brightly. The wind blowing from the other side of the sea was also unhindered and rather strong. The sea breeze traveled through the halls and stone platforms, ultimately arriving in front of her. Madame Mu smelled the salty scent of the wind and that familiar dampness, but she did not miss it. The sea breeze could too easily turn living creatures into lifeless salted fish, and the damp air could easily become sticky, bringing with it a great deal of pressure. A hint of exhaustion appeared in her eyes as she said, "Then let's wait a little longer." "Just what is my lady waiting for?" The demon lord slightly arched his brows at her. "Waiting for them to dig up that mountain and see if that person is dead or not. To be able to obtain the loyalty of Black Robe and the demon commander, to force his mighty father into the abyss, to be able to obtain the fervent worship of all the inhabitants of the snowy plains of the land of demons in a few short years." The young Chen Chongqing naturally did not lack intelligence, but he now realized that he was finding it harder and harder to understand just what Madame Mu was thinking. Madame Mu indifferently said, "At this time, I don't even know what I want to see." The demon lord stared into her eyes and said, "Isn't what you should be doing now stopping them?" Madame Mu asked why. The demon lord suddenly felt that he had made a mistake. No one in the world could control or even understand an Aquarius woman. Madame Mu did not know what he was thinking, but she calmly looked to the north. She truly did not know what sort of answer she wanted to wait for, but she was sure that she wanted to wait for an answer, whether he was alive or dead. Before going to the Starfall Mountains, Chen Chongqing had once thought that as long as there was an answer, it was not good. And then he saw the black cliff, the unbreakable seal. He saw no answer, no truth. This was the best result. But in the end, there could only be one truth. The answer would be revealed sooner or later, and he had already vaguely guessed at it. This made his mood rather gloomy, especially when he thought about Luo Luo, who was still in the Imperial City, hoping that he could rescue the White Emperor. The vast sky of stars had already retreated, revealing the morning light, which was then shattered by countless, even brighter sword glows. Like the corpses of fireflies, they drifted down to the black cliff. Chen Chongqing sat cross-legged in front of the black cliff, his sheath across his knees. Today, he did not close his eyes to meditate. Instead, he calmly gazed at the black cliff as if he wanted to see through it. Several hundred famed swords from the previous generation of the Garden of Zhou, with his body as the source, incessantly slashed at the black cliff, but they did not truly strike at the black cliff's strength. Instead, near, far on the lake, on the summit, they tempered themselves against the invisible seal, just like they had in the past few days. The seal that had originated from the same source as the Tong Palace was now much weaker, no longer possessing its former might. Correspondingly, the momentum of the swords was even more extraordinary. According to their respective positions, they formed the South Stream Temple Sword Array and slowly but inexorably crushed forward. The Starfall Mountains were filled with awe-inspiring sword intents. At a casual glance, one could see a dazzling sword glow. Daoist Siuin had once visited Mount Li, and when he saw this sight, he couldn't help but recall the famous myriad sword array. Besides Daoist Siuin, Ling Haizhuang, and the other prefects of the Orthodoxy, as well as Winshui City's five-kind man, were all standing guard at Qin Chongqing's side. The Bear tribe, the Sher clan, and several other large clans had dispatched their bravest and strongest warriors to take control of the area around the Black Cliff. Several hundred demi-human experts had gathered in the mountain range with a circumference of several Li experts on the level of Jin Yulu and Xiaoda numbered 10 some. Even farther away, on the other side of the lake, dust was rising and the roars of monsters could occasionally be heard. The armies of the various tribes had probably already taken control of all the valleys. The situation had long since become clear, regardless of whether the ministers, generals, and tribal leaders of the demi-human court believed it or not. The truth would very quickly appear before their eyes, to be continued